The first time I tried flirting at a Halloween party, I got into an argument with a guy dressed as a banana. To be fair, I thought he was someone else. But that didn't make the situation any less disastrous. Here's the thing. I wasn't even planning on going to the party. My friend Nate guilt-tripped me into it, saying, "Come on, Jake. It'll be fun. Free booze, people in costumes. You might even meet someone." He said it like finding true love while dressed as a cowboy wasn't one of the worst ideas imaginable. But against my better judgment, I threw on a hat, some boots, and a fake sheriff's badge, and headed out. The party was already in full swing when I got there. Music blaring, people crammed into every corner, and a punch bowl that looked like it could dissolve a shoe. I wandered around for a bit, sipping my drink and awkwardly dodging people's inflatable wings and plastic weapons, until I saw her. She was standing by the snack table, refilling a plate with candy corn. She wore a black dress with a witch's hat tilted to the side, and she had this mischievous smile that made me forget how words worked for a second. I knew immediately I had to talk to her. But of course, I had no idea what to say. So, naturally, I started with candy corn. "You actually like those?" I asked, nodding toward her plate. She looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Of course. Candy corn's a classic." "Classic?" I repeated, pretending to be horrified. "You mean edible disappointment?" She laughed, a soft, genuine laugh, and I felt my confidence surge. "That's a bold statement, Sheriff," she said, eyeing the ridiculous badge on my chest. "What do you suggest, then?" "Twizzlers." "Twizzlers are the snack of champions," I said, grinning. "It's just science." We bantered back and forth for a few minutes, and for once, I didn't feel like I was completely bombing. She was funny, easy to talk to, and every time she smiled, I felt like I'd unlocked a secret achievement. Just when I thought things were going well, though, the music changed and someone bumped into me from behind, spilling half my drink down my shirt. "Oh, shit," I muttered, trying to shake off the booze from my very cheap, very fake leather vest. "Smooth," she teased, handing me a napkin. "Thanks," I said, blotting my shirt as best as I could. "This is going exactly how I planned." She grinned, about to say something, when suddenly someone in a full-body banana costume walked over. "Hey," he yelled, pointing a foam finger at me. "You're in my spot." I blinked, confused. "Your spot?" "Yeah," Banana Guy said, swaying slightly like he'd already had too much to drink. "I was standing here 5 minutes ago, man." The girl beside me stifled a laugh, clearly entertained. "Is this like a banana law or something?" I decided to roll with it. "Yeah," I said, squaring my shoulders. "I don't remember seeing any reserve signs, fruit boy." He narrowed his eyes, or at least I think he did. It's hard to tell when someone's face is surrounded by a giant yellow peel. "Don't mess with the banana," he warned, wagging his foam finger dramatically. "You beat the buck." Now, this was the point where I could have gracefully disengaged and walked away, but my pride, and possibly the tequila, got the better of me. "Well," I said, leaning into my fake sheriff persona, "in this town we have rules. And rule number 1? No potassium-related drama." Banana Guy blinked at me again, I think, and then burst out laughing. "All right, Sheriff," he said, throwing up his foam hands in surrender. "You win this time." He gave me a playful shove, stumbled off toward the dance floor, and started doing what can only be described as a deeply chaotic banana-themed jig. The girl next to me was laughing so hard she had to grab the table for support. "That," she said, gasping for air, "was the dumbest thing I've ever seen." "Yeah," I said, still trying to recover from my showdown with the banana. "Welcome to my life." We stood there, catching our breath, and for a moment, everything felt easy, natural. Like maybe dressing up as a ridiculous cowboy and going to a Halloween party wasn't the worst idea after all. "So," I said, glancing down at my mostly empty drink, "since I've already made a fool of myself, how about I buy you a non-candy corn snack sometime? Maybe a real Twizzler or two?" She grinned, the brim of her witch's hat dipping slightly. "You know what, Sheriff? I think I'd like that." And just like that, she pulled out her phone and handed it to me. I typed in my number, still half expecting her to laugh and walk away. But instead, she gave me a playful salute with her candy corn plate. "I'll text you," she said, flashing one last smile. "Just try to stay out of trouble, okay?" No promises. I called after her as she disappeared into the crowd, her hat bobbing with every step. I stood there for a second, grinning like an idiot, still holding my half-soaked vest. Sure, I got into a showdown with a banana and spilled half my drink down my shirt, but somehow, I'd still walked away with her number. And honestly, that felt like a win. This one's known as the time we kidnapped the school's PA system. And trust me, it was not supposed to escalate the way it did. It started as a harmless prank. It ended with half the town thinking we were being invaded by aliens. The idea came from Jack, who had what I can only describe as main character energy. Jack didn't just cause trouble, he curated it. The guy could convince you that stealing a police horse was a community service project. So when Jack strolled in a homeroom one day with that wild look in his eye and said, "I've got an idea," we knew we were about to do something incredibly stupid. "Okay," he said, leaning in like he was plotting a heist. "What if we take over the school's PA system?" At first, it sounded impossible. The PA system was sacred ground. It was the voice of authority, the thing that announced snow days, tardy slips, and gym class reminders. You couldn't just take it over like it was a student council bake sale. But Jack already had it all figured out. See, the school's PA system was ancient, some dusty box wired into the wall of the main office, guarded by our secretary, Mrs. Jenkins, who had two moods, asleep and pissed. According to Jack's sources, which I'm 90% sure was just him eavesdropping, Mrs. Jenkins always took a smoke break at exactly 10:15 a.m., leaving the PA system completely unguarded. "That's our window," Jack said, slamming his notebook like we were planning a bank robbery. "We get in, make one announcement, and get out. Simple." Spoiler, it was not simple. The plan was that I'd be the lookout, standing by the vending machines outside the office. Jack would sneak in, make the announcement, and we'd be out before anyone even noticed. Easy, right? Wrong. The next morning, we were ready. At exactly 10:13 a.m., Mrs. Jenkins grabbed her purse and shuffled off toward the staff parking lot, muttering something about needing her damn break. Jack gave me a nod, and we sprang into action. He slipped into the office like a ninja, leaving me standing nervously by the vending machine, trying not to look suspicious. Everything was going fine until Jack decided to improvise. Originally, the plan was to make a quick, harmless announcement, something like, "Attention students, today's lunch is nachos." Dumb, but funny. But once Jack got behind the mic, the power went straight to his head. "Attention students," his voice boomed over the loudspeakers, echoing through every classroom. "This is your new principal, Supreme Commander Jack. I hereby declare that all gym classes are canceled, effective immediately. Also, the vending machines are now free." I nearly choked. "Get out of there!" I hissed through the door, waving my arms like a madman. But Jack wasn't done. No, Jack was just getting started. "And one more thing," he continued, his voice dripping with fake seriousness. "If anyone finds a pair of gym shorts with the name Kevin written on the waistband, please return them to me. They are of personal importance." I swear I could hear half the school howling with laughter from the other side of the building. Classrooms were in chaos. Teachers were scrambling to figure out what the hell was going on. And Jack was having the time of his life. "This is not a drill," he added dramatically. "The vending machines are officially liberated." At this point, I knew we had about 30 seconds before the teachers swarmed the office like angry bees. I banged on the door. "Jack, for the love of God, stop." Finally, he grinned, leaned into the mic one last time, and said, "Jack, out." And then he dropped the microphone. Literally. He dropped it. There was a loud thunk as the mic hit the floor, followed by a burst of static that sounded like the PA system had just exploded. That was when things took a turn. Unbeknownst to us, the school's PA system had a direct line to the local emergency services, because of course it did. Apparently, the combination of static and Jack's nonsense announcement triggered some kind of automated alert, and within minutes, the school was swarming with emergency personnel. Fire trucks, ambulances, even a SWAT van. The first thing I saw was the school security guard sprinting toward the office, walkie-talkie in hand, shouting, "Code Red! We got a code red!" I grabbed Jack and yanked him out of the office just in time. "We need to leave," I said, dragging him down the hall while the sirens outside grew louder. Students were pouring out of classrooms, cheering like we just won the lottery. Someone shouted, "Free vending machine day," and a stampede of kids raced toward the soda machines like their lives depended on it. Meanwhile, Jack was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Dude, this is amazing. This is a felony," I snapped, trying to shove him through the back door before the SWAT team showed up. We barely made it out the side exit before the principal, 2 cops, and a very confused firefighter stormed into the office. I heard someone yell, "Who the hell is Supreme Commander Jack?" We ran across the soccer field, breathless and hysterical, until we were far enough from the building to safely collapse in the grass. "Dude," I gasped, "we're gonna die." Jack just lay there, staring up at the sky, still grinning like an idiot. "Totally worth it," he said. Incredibly, we didn't get caught. Nobody figured out who had hijacked the PA system, though rumors spread like wildfire. Some people thought it was a rival school pulling a prank. Others claimed it was a ghost haunting the building, which I still think is hilarious. The SWAT team left after about 20 minutes, looking thoroughly unimpressed, and Principal Whitman sent out a school-wide email that simply read, "The vending machines are not free. Stay in class." And Jack became a legend. To this day, people still talk about the time Supreme Commander Jack took over the school and declared gym class illegal. And every time someone asks about it, Jack just shrugs, grins, and says, "You had to be there." Honestly, yeah, you really did. It was supposed to be a low-key night, the kind where you stay in, maybe pour a glass of wine, scroll mindlessly through your phone, and tell yourself you're happy not being out in the chaos. I had every intention of doing just that, until my friend texted me, "We're at a bar down the street. Get over here. You need this." And the worst part? She wasn't wrong. So, I threw on a black dress that hugged my body in a way that made me feel reckless, swiped on some lipstick, and told myself, "Just one drink. Then you can leave." But deep down, I already knew how this night was going to end. It always ends the same. The bar was crowded, loud with that steady hum of conversations bleeding into each other, the air thick with perfume, laughter, and bad decisions waiting to unfold. My friends were already 2 drinks in, waving at me wildly from the corner, like they just won a prize, and I was it. I smiled and made my way over to them, already bracing myself for the night I'd promised I wouldn't have. And that's when I saw him. He was standing at the bar, leaning against it like he was barely aware of the noise around him. He wasn't doing anything special, just holding his drink, watching the room with the kind of relaxed ease that only a few people can pull off. He looked like someone who wasn't trying to impress anyone, which of course made him even more intriguing. Our eyes met for just a second, but it was enough. There was a flicker of recognition, a silent exchange that said, "Yeah, I see you too." He didn't smile right away, just held my gaze, waiting as if daring me to come closer. And of course I did. I excused myself from my friends, slipping through the crowd until I was standing beside him. "You look like you've got a secret," I said, leaning on the bar just enough to brush his arm. He glanced at me, the corner of his mouth curving into a slow, lazy grin. "Maybe I do." It was a stupid line, but it worked. Somehow it always works. We started talking. Small talk at first, the kind of easy, surface-level banter that strangers use to size each other up. His voice was low, smooth, the kind that makes every word sound intentional. And the way he looked at me, it wasn't hungry, but curious. Like I was a puzzle he just decided he wanted to solve. I like that. I like the way it made me feel, wanted, but not in the desperate way most people make you feel in bars like this. After the first drink, things started to blur. Not in a sloppy way, but in that perfect, buzzing way where time stretches and compresses, and you feel like you could stay in this moment forever. His hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch that lingered longer than it should have. I could feel the night tilting beneath me, slipping into that dangerous territory where everything feels inevitable. "Want to get out of here?" he asked, his voice low, like it was a secret meant just for me. I nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, let's go." The walk to his apartment was fast, a blur of streetlights and cold air, our bodies moving close enough to touch, but not quite. That tension, that perfect electric tension, was thick between us, and I could feel it in every step, every glance, every unspoken thought. By the time we made it through his front door, we were already pulling at each other's clothes, laughing and breathless, stumbling into his apartment like two people who knew exactly how this night was going to end. The sex was good, fast, messy, the kind of sex that feels like a race you're both trying to win, but don't really care who crosses the finish line first. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, just two bodies crashing into each other, chasing something that felt almost real, even though we both knew it wasn't. And for a little while it felt perfect, like maybe this was enough. But then morning came, and mornings always tell the truth. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window, cutting across the room in harsh, unforgiving lines. His arm was draped over me, heavy and warm, and his breathing was soft and steady against my back. For a second, I stayed there, pretending that this moment could stretch on forever, that I could ignore the weight settling into my chest, the familiar ache that always shows up when the night fades into daylight. But I couldn't ignore it for long. I never can. I slipped out from under his arm as quietly as I could, gathering my clothes from the floor in silence. There's always something surreal about putting on last night's outfit in the bright light of morning, like you're stepping back into a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit anymore. He stirred as I was pulling on my shoes, blinking awake. "You leaving?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I forced a smile. "Yeah, got an early morning." He nodded, rubbing a hand through his messy hair. "It was fun," he said, and the way he said it made it clear he meant it. "Yeah," I whispered. "It was..." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb felt longer than it should have, the cold morning air biting at my skin. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, but it didn't help. The cold wasn't just outside. It was inside, too, that familiar chill that settles deep in your bones after nights like these. The Uber ride home was filled with silence, the kind that forces you to sit with every thought you've been trying to avoid. I stared out the window, watching the world pass by, and told myself this was fine, that this was what I wanted. No expectations, no complications, just a night. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to shake. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about the pattern. The way I keep searching for connection in fleeting moments, hoping they'll fill the spaces inside me that never seem to stay full. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed without even bothering to change. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and unmoving, offering no answers, no clarity, just silence. I wish I could say this was the last time, that I'd finally learned how to stop chasing something that slips through my fingers every time I think I've caught it. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe someday I'll figure it out, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll keep going, night after night, hoping that one of these mornings will feel different. But for now, all I can do is keep moving forward. One drink, one kiss, one morning after the next. About 3 years ago, I ghosted my dad. I cut him out of my life completely, blocked his number, unfollowed him on every social media platform, and pretended he didn't exist. And the craziest part? He has no idea why. Honestly, I'm not even sure I know why. Or maybe I do, but it's hard to explain. It wasn't one big blow-up or some dramatic, unforgivable betrayal. It was more like a series of small things, thousands of little cuts that I ignored for years, pretending they didn't hurt until I couldn't pretend anymore. And instead of dealing with it, I just disappeared. It sounds harsh, I know. I can already feel the judgment from people who think, "He's your dad. You only get one." And they're right. But if they knew the whole story, maybe they'd understand. Growing up, my dad wasn't a bad guy. He provided for us, took us on family vacations, and made sure I had everything I needed. But he also had a way of making me feel small without even realizing it. He was the kind of dad who couldn't compliment you without slipping in some backhanded remark. Like when I got into my dream college, he said, "Wow, they must have lowered the admission standards this year." Stuff like that. Every win came with an asterisk. Every proud moment with a subtle reminder that I wasn't quite good enough. And I tried. I tried so hard to be the kind of son he could be proud of. I got good grades, stayed out of trouble, followed the plan he had for my life. But no matter what I did, it always felt like I was running on a treadmill, chasing approval that stayed just out of reach. Then, after college, things got worse. I didn't want to follow the career path he'd mapped out for me. He wanted me to go into finance, but I ended up taking a job in marketing instead. It wasn't anything wild or rebellious, but to him, it might as well have been treason. He made sure to remind me at every family gathering that I was wasting my potential. "You're smart, but not smart enough to know what you're throwing away," he'd say with a chuckle. Everyone would laugh along like it was just a joke, but it never felt like one. I let it slide for years, told myself it wasn't a big deal, that this was just how he showed love. But the resentment kept building, quietly filling every conversation we had like smoke in a room with no windows. I'd call him out sometimes, little jabs back at him, but he'd always brush it off. "Don't be so sensitive," he'd say. "It's just a joke." The last straw wasn't anything special. No screaming match, no slammed doors. Just another phone call that left me feeling like I'd been sucker punched. He'd called to talk about my job, and when I told him I got promoted, he said, "Well, that's great, but imagine where you'd be if you'd listened to me." I remember hanging up the phone and sitting there in stunned silence, like I'd finally reached the end of a long, exhausting road. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I didn't make a plan. I didn't think it through. I just stopped. Stopped answering his calls, stopped replying to his texts, stopped showing up to family events. It was like flipping a switch, and suddenly, he wasn't part of my life anymore. At first, it felt good, liberating even. I didn't have to dread phone calls or fake enthusiasm for conversations that left me feeling drained. For the first time in my life, I felt free. But the freedom came with a price. My mom called me a few weeks later, confused and hurt. "Why aren't you talking to your dad?" she asked. I didn't have an answer for her, at least not one that wouldn't make me sound petty. So I mumbled something about needing space and hoped she'd let it go. She didn't, of course. She called me every other week, gently trying to nudge me back into the family fold. "He misses you," she'd say. "He asks about you all the time." And that's the part that kills me. Because the truth is, my dad isn't some monster. He's just him, a flawed, complicated person who probably did his best, even if his best wasn't what I needed. And now I'm stuck in this weird limbo. Too stubborn to reach out, but too guilty to fully move on. The longer I stay silent, the harder it gets to break it. Every missed call is a brick in the wall I've built between us, and the wall keeps getting taller and taller. I tell myself I'll reach out soon, but soon always feels like tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. Last Christmas, my mom gave me a gift from him, a book about marketing strategies wrapped in silver paper. There was a note inside, scrawled in his familiar handwriting. "I know this isn't finance, but I'm proud of you anyway. Dad." I cried when I read it. Not the big, dramatic kind of crying you see in movies. Just a few quiet tears, the kind that sneak up on you when you're least expecting them. I stuffed the book in a drawer and pretended it didn't affect me, but it did. It still does. I think about calling him all the time. I rehearse conversations in my head, imagining what I'd say, how he'd react. But the fear always stops me. What if he doesn't forgive me? What if the distance between us is too big to bridge now? Or worse, what if he does forgive me? What if he welcomes me back with open arms, no questions asked, and I'm left with the unbearable weight of knowing I wasted all this time for nothing? So I stay silent. The weird thing is, I know he probably doesn't even remember half the things that hurt me. To him, they were just words, throwaway comments, harmless jokes. But to me, they were everything. And now I'm carrying this secret like a stone in my chest. Too heavy to hold, but too important to let go. I tell myself I'll call him soon. Maybe next week. Or the week after that. I'll find the right moment, the perfect excuse, and I'll make things right. But deep down, I know there's no such thing as the right moment. There's just now. And every day I wait, the silence between us grows louder. I don't know how this story ends. Maybe I'll find the courage to pick up the phone. Or maybe I'll let the silence stretch on until it's too late, and all I'll have left are missed calls and unopened texts. All I know is this: loving someone doesn't always mean staying close. And sometimes, the hardest thing to forgive isn't what someone else did to you. It's what you did to yourself. It all started with me thinking I could fix the Wi-Fi, which in hindsight was my first mistake. The internet had been cutting out randomly all day, which is a modern form of torture. Emails wouldn't load, streaming froze mid-episode, and every website gave me that condescending, "Looks like you're offline" message. I rebooted my laptop 3 times, hoping it would magically solve the problem. It didn't. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe it'll come back on its own, I told myself. Spoiler, it did not. Around hour 2 of Wi-Fi purgatory, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. The router sat on a dusty shelf in the corner, blinking smugly. I stared at it like it was an old foe, one I'd fought many times before, but never truly defeated. It blinked again, daring me to challenge its authority. "Okay," I whispered. "Let's dance." I started with the basics. Unplug the router, wait 30 seconds, plug it back in. That's what tech support always says, right? I followed the sacred ritual, watched the little lights go out, and gave myself a mental high five. Easy. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. When I plugged it back in, the router hummed to life and promptly refused to connect to anything. The lights blinked in an angry, unpredictable pattern, like a strobe light at a rave no one wanted to attend. "Great," I muttered, crouching down to inspect the mess of tangled cords behind the router. There were at least 4 different cables, all snaking around each other like they were in a toxic relationship. One was labeled Ethernet, another was plugged into nothing, which was concerning. I fiddled with a few of them, hoping one would be the magic fix. Instead, I accidentally unplugged the entire power strip. The TV went dark, the router shut off again, and my phone, on 12% battery, chirped mournfully as it lost its last lifeline to Wi-Fi. "Cool, cool, cool," I whispered, sitting back on my heels, feeling the first twinges of defeat. I knew I should probably call my internet provider, but that felt like admitting I'd been beaten by a box with blinking lights. Instead, I grabbed my phone, Googling how to fix Wi-Fi with the desperation of someone on borrowed time. Every solution I found started with, "Did you try rebooting your router?" Yes, obviously. I tried that 6 times. No new answers, no salvation, just forums full of frustrated people, all trapped in the same tech limbo I was in. I tried calling the provider anyway, because I had no other options. After 5 minutes on hold, listening to elevator music that sounded like it was recorded underwater, a cheerful automated voice informed me, "Your estimated wait time is 42 minutes. "Nope," I muttered, hanging up immediately. I'd rather live in a Wi-Fi-less dystopia than wait on hold for the better part of an hour. At this point, I did what every reasonable person does when faced with technological failure. I paced around the apartment, muttering curses under my breath and glaring at the router like it had insulted my entire bloodline. The cat, sensing my deteriorating mental state, jumped onto the table and knocked over a glass of water with the casual malice only a cat can muster. "Not now," I groaned, grabbing a towel to mop up the mess. The water dribbled onto my laptop, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I'd short-circuited the one device I had left. But the laptop survived. Barely. The Wi-Fi, however, did not. I sat back down next to the router, crisscross applesauce, and stared at it like a defeated chess player contemplating checkmate. Maybe this was just life now. An endless spiral of rebooting routers and resetting passwords until the sweet release of death. And then, out of sheer desperation, I did the one thing I'd been avoiding. I pressed the tiny reset button on the back of the router. You know, the one you need a paperclip to push, as if it holds the power to launch nuclear missiles instead of just restarting your internet. I held the button down, whispered a quick prayer to the gods of Wi-Fi, and waited. The lights flickered, and then miraculously they stabilized. One by one, the familiar green lights blinked back on, steady and confident, like a tiny digital heartbeat. "Come on," I whispered, refreshing my phone's Wi-Fi settings. "Allo dingi con spoon." And then, blessedly, those magical words appeared. "Connected." I gasped, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline. "Yes," I shouted, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The cat blinked at me from across the room, unimpressed by my victory. I jumped up, did a small, ridiculous victory dance in the middle of the living room, and immediately texted a friend. "Wi-Fi is back. I've won the war." My friend replied almost instantly, "Congrats, hacker man." What are you going to do with all that power? Absolutely nothing, I muttered to myself, collapsing onto the couch. I scrolled aimlessly through social media for a few minutes, just to bask in the sheer luxury of working Wi-Fi. I didn't even care what I was looking at. I was just grateful to be connected again, part of the world, however chaotic it was. The TV came back to life, Netflix loading like a beacon of hope on the screen. The familiar ba-dum of the opening sound felt like applause from the universe. I grinned, propped my feet up on the coffee table, and settled in, ready to enjoy the fruits of my labor. But just as I hit play on my show, the Wi-Fi cut out again, and all I could do was laugh. Long, loud, slightly maniacal laughter that scared the cat and echoed through the apartment like the final act of a person who had officially given up. Because that's life, right? You solve one problem, only for another to pop up. You press all the buttons, rearrange all the chords, and just when you think you've got it figured out, poof, everything crashes again. I sat there for a moment, letting the absurdity of it all wash over me. Then I turned off the TV, tossed my phone onto the couch, and walked to the kitchen. Maybe I didn't need Wi-Fi tonight. Maybe what I really needed was a snack. And if the internet still wasn't working tomorrow, well, that's future me's problem. This was supposed to be a normal night. I had just finished a late shift at work and was driving home, dead tired and running on fumes. It was the kind of exhaustion that makes the world feel surreal, like you're walking through a dream you can't quite wake up from. It was just past midnight. The roads were empty, and the rain had started to fall in that slow, steady way that makes everything blurry through the windshield. I was about 20 minutes from home, cruising down an old back road that cut through miles of thick forest. The thing about that road is that it's quiet, too quiet. No streetlights, no houses for miles. Just trees pressing in from both sides, and every once in a while, a pair of glowing animal eyes reflecting off your headlights from the bushes. It always gave me a weird vibe, but that night, it felt even heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. I told myself I was just overtired. I'd driven this road hundreds of times. Nothing ever happened on it, except maybe a deer darting out in front of you now and then. But as I rounded a bend, my headlights swept across something on the side of the road. There was a woman standing there. I hit the brakes hard, tires skidding on the wet pavement. My heart leapt into my throat as the car screeched to a stop just a few feet away from her. She didn't move. She just stood there on the shoulder, drenched from the rain, staring at me. Now, I'm not proud to say this, but my first thought was to drive away. Everything about her felt wrong. The way she was just standing there, motionless, in the middle of nowhere, in the pouring rain. But something in me wouldn't let me leave. What if she was hurt? What if she'd been in an accident and needed help? I rolled down the window a crack, just enough to call out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" She didn't respond, just stared at me with these wide, vacant eyes, like she couldn't quite comprehend what I was saying. Her clothes were soaked through. Some kind of old-fashioned dress, the kind you'd see at a thrift store, but not something anyone would be wearing out here at night. Her hair hung limp over her face, and she looked off, like a photograph that had been blurred around the edges. Something in my gut told me to leave, to roll up the window, and drive away as fast as I could. But before I could make a decision, she took a step forward. "I need to go home," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. My skin crawled. There was something strange about the way she said it. Like she didn't mean her home. Like she didn't even know where that was. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I unlocked the passenger door. "Get in," I said, trying to sound calm. She opened the door slowly and slid into the seat, moving with the stiffness of someone who'd been out in the cold for far too long. As she sat down, a wave of cold air swept through the car, sharp enough to make me shiver. She folded her hands in her lap and stared straight ahead, not saying a word. I pulled back onto the road, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than usual. "Where do you live?" I asked after a minute, glancing at her out of the corner of my eye. She didn't answer right away. For a moment, I thought she hadn't heard me, but then she whispered, "It's farther down." There was something unsettling about the way she said it, like even she wasn't sure where down was. But I nodded and kept driving, hoping she'd give me more information as we went. The road seemed to stretch longer than usual that night. The trees loomed closer, and the rain grew heavier, drumming against the windshield like a heartbeat. I tried to keep my focus on the road, but I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease creeping up my spine. Every few seconds, I'd glance at her, hoping she'd say something, anything, but she just sat there, stiff and silent, hands folded neatly in her lap. Then, without warning, she whispered, "You missed the turn." A chill ran down my spine. "What turn?" I asked, gripping the wheel harder. There hadn't been any turns on this road, just endless trees and darkness. She turned her head slowly to face me, and that's when I saw it, her eyes. They were all wrong, not just tired or glassy wrong, like they didn't belong in her face. Too dark, too deep, like staring into the bottom of a well that had no end. And in that moment, I knew two things with absolute certainty. This wasn't a person sitting next to me, and I'd made a terrible mistake letting her in. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop on the wet pavement. "You need to get out," I said, my voice shaking. She didn't move, just sat there, staring at me with those awful, bottomless eyes. "Get out!" I shouted, panic surging through me. For a long, agonizing moment, she just stared. Then slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl, she opened the door and stepped out into the rain. She stood there on the side of the road, watching as I fumbled to throw the car into gear. And just before I sped off, she smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too forced, like someone imitating an expression they didn't understand. And as I drove away, heart hammering in my chest, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was gone, not walking down the road, not standing where I'd left her, just gone, like she'd never been there in the first place. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't tell anyone what happened, either. Who would believe me? But every time I drive down that road now, I feel it, that same cold, heavy presence lurking just beyond the edge of the trees. And sometimes, late at night, when the rain starts to fall, I swear I see her standing there again, waiting. This happened 2 weeks ago, and I still don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. It was a Friday night, and I was home alone. My roommate, Kevin, was out of town for the weekend, and I was looking forward to having the place to myself. The apartment was small but cozy, and I figured I'd spend the night with some pizza, a horror movie, and a couple of beers. Everything started off normal enough. I ordered food, settled on the couch with a blanket, and put on some cheesy slasher film. Outside, the wind was picking up, howling softly through the alley behind the building. I remember thinking how glad I was to be inside, cozy and warm. Then, just after midnight, I got the first text. It was from Kevin, or at least, it was from his number. The message was short. "Hey, I'm home early." For a second, I stared at my phone, confused. I hadn't heard the door unlock, hadn't heard anyone come in. Maybe you forgot to mention it, I thought. But still, something felt off. I texted back, "You're home? I didn't hear you come in." The response came almost immediately. "Can you open the door?" I forgot my key. That's when my stomach dropped. I knew for a fact Kevin hadn't taken his keys with him, because I saw them hanging by the door before he left. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, my heart pounding. "Where are you?" I finally typed. A pause. Then, just outside. "Please open up." The apartment was silent, but every hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something about the message didn't sit right. I stood up slowly, every step toward the door feeling heavier than the last. When I got to the peephole, I hesitated. I had this awful feeling that whatever I saw on the other side wouldn't be Kevin. I pressed my eye to the peephole, and my heart stopped. There was someone standing there, but it wasn't Kevin. It looked like him. Same hoodie, same jeans, same messy hair, but the face wasn't quite right. The smile stretched too wide, like someone trying to mimic how a human smiles but getting it horribly wrong. And the eyes, they were off. Too large, too dark, staring directly at the peephole. I stumbled back from the door, my heart slamming against my ribs. My phone buzzed in my hand. Another text. "Why won't you open the door?" I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely type. "You're not Kevin?" I sent, my breath coming in shallow bursts. A reply came instantly. "Of course I am. Let me in." The handle jiggled, then soft at first, then harder, like whatever was out there was getting impatient. I backed away, panic rising in my chest, and grabbed the nearest thing I could, a chair from the kitchen. I wedged it under the door handle, locking it in place. The jiggling stopped. For a moment, there was silence. And then, tap, tap, tap. The knocks were soft and rhythmic, just like someone gently rapping their knuckles on the door. But they weren't coming from the front door anymore. They were coming from the window. I spun around, heart racing, and stared at the window in the living room. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of someone standing on the other side of the glass. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Another message from Kevin, "I see you." The air felt heavy, like the walls were closing in around me. I grabbed my phone and sprinted to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I locked it, shoved my dresser in front of it, and curled up on the bed, shaking. I stared at the phone, too scared to turn it off, too scared to answer the texts. Then the knocking started again, this time on the bedroom window. Top, top, top. My blood ran cold. I live on the 3rd floor. There's no fire escape. No way anyone should be able to reach that window. But the knocks were there, soft and deliberate. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it. But some horrible, morbid part of me needed to know. Slowly, I crawled toward the window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. It was Kevin, or something that looked like him, standing on the other side, smiling that awful, twisted smile. He raised his hand and knocked again. Tap, 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 his knuckles dragging slowly down the glass. Then, in a voice that was almost Kevin's, he whispered, "Let me in." I slammed the curtain shut and backed away, my heart pounding in my throat. My phone buzzed again, over and over, message after message, all from Kevin. "Let me in. I'm Cole. Please, let me in." The knocking grew louder, more urgent, and I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out. I don't know how long I sat there, rocking back and forth, waiting for it to stop. Eventually it did. When morning came, I found the apartment quiet again. The windows were closed. The door was still locked, the chair still wedged under the handle. But my phone, there was one last message from Kevin, sent just before sunrise. "See you soon." Kevin came back from his trip later that day. The real Kevin. I told him what happened, but he just laughed it off. "Man, you need to lay off the horror movies," he said, grinning. "But I know what I saw, and I know that whatever was outside my door, it's not done with me. Every night since, I've heard it. Just as I'm about to fall asleep, it starts again. Top, top, top. And one of these nights, I know I'll slip. I'll forget to lock the door. Or maybe I'll be too tired to check the window. And when I do, it'll finally get in." We met at a dog park. I didn't even have a dog. I was just tagging along with a friend, half-heartedly trying to cheer myself up after a bad week. But there he was, chasing after his goofy Labrador, laughing like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. When his dog barreled straight into me, nearly knocking me over, he ran over, out of breath and smiling. "I swear he's not usually this friendly," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Or this clumsy?" I teased, brushing dirt off my jeans. He grinned. "That too." And just like that, a conversation started. It was easy, unplanned. One of those moments that makes you think maybe the universe is giving you a little nudge. We talked until the sun dipped low and my friend had to drag me away. As I walked off, he called after me, "So, when are you getting a dog? You'll need one if we're going to keep running into each other." I laughed, but before I left, I gave him my number. It felt like the kind of thing I never did, but with him, it made sense. He texted me the same night. What followed were weeks that felt effortless. He wasn't flashy, but he was thoughtful. He'd text me good morning without fail, send me pictures of his dog curled up on the couch with goofy captions. Our dates weren't grand gestures. They were late-night ice cream runs, long walks through the city, and hours spent curled up on my couch, laughing at terrible Netflix shows. It felt safe in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. He showed up every time, and that made me believe maybe this time wouldn't end the way the others had. Maybe, finally, someone would stay. And for a while he did, until he didn't. It started slowly, the way these things always do. The first time he canceled plans, I didn't think much of it. Everyone gets tired. "Let's reschedule," he said. And we did. But then the rescheduled plans turned into vague promises. "Let's hang out soon," he'd say. Soon. That word sat heavy in my chest every time I read it. Soon became later, and later became nothing. At first, I tried to be understanding. People have lives, right? Not everything revolves around me. I told myself not to panic. But it's hard not to panic when someone starts pulling away, piece by piece, and you can't figure out why. The texts became shorter, the calls less frequent. He stopped making plans, and suddenly, I was the only one holding up the thread of whatever we'd been building. It felt like trying to keep a balloon from drifting away. No matter how tightly I held on, I could feel it slipping from my grasp. One night, after waiting all day for a text that never came, I finally broke. I stared at my phone, fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating whether to reach out. Part of me wanted to let it go, to avoid the conversation I knew was coming. But the other part, the part that still hoped, couldn't let it end in silence. I sent the message. "Hey, are we still okay? I feel like something's changed." The dots appeared, and I held my breath waiting. When the message came through, it was everything I'd feared. "I care about you a lot," he wrote, "but I don't think I'm ready for anything serious right now." I stared at the screen, feeling the words press down on me like a weight. I wanted to ask him why. Why did he make me believe in something if he wasn't ready for it? Why did he act like he wanted to stay, only to leave the moment I started to feel safe? But I knew better. The answer wouldn't change anything. So I wrote back, "Thanks for being honest." And that was the last thing I ever said to him. The silence that followed was deafening. It's strange how loud an unanswered text can feel. How empty your days become when the person who filled them disappears. I tried to move on, to convince myself that it was better to know the truth than to be led on. But the truth still hurt. Knowing he wasn't ready didn't make me miss him any less. Some nights, I'd catch myself scrolling through our old texts, reading them like a story I couldn't bear to finish. I kept wondering if I'd done something wrong, if I'd been too much or not enough. But the hardest part was realizing that it wasn't about me at all. Some people leave not because of anything you did, but because staying feels harder than they're willing to handle. That's the thing no one tells you about heartbreak. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in waves. One minute you feel okay, and the next, a memory crashes over you, sharp and unexpected, knocking the air from your lungs. But slowly, painfully slowly, the waves start to soften. The ache lingers, but it becomes bearable. The nights get quieter, the sadness less consuming. And one day, without even realizing it, you go a whole afternoon without thinking about them. It's been a few months now, and I'm still figuring out how to live with the pieces he left behind. Some days, I feel like I'm finally okay, like I've made peace with the way things ended. Other days, the sadness creeps back in, reminding me that healing isn't a straight line. But here's what I've learned. I can survive it. I've survived it before, and I'll survive it again. Because as much as it hurts to lose someone, it hurts even more to lose yourself trying to keep them. These days, I'm learning how to love myself in the way I kept hoping someone else would. I'm learning that my worth isn't tied to someone's decision to stay or go. I deserve more than half measures and almost relationships. I deserve someone who shows up, not just when it's convenient, but when it's hard. And until that person comes along, I'll keep showing up for myself. I'll keep building a life I love, piece by piece, day by day. Because if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this. I am enough. With or without someone else, I am enough. I still believe in love. Not the perfect fairy tale kind, but the real, messy, complicated kind. The kind that stays even when things get tough. And if love finds me again, I'll be ready. But this time, I'll know that no matter what happens, I am whole on my own. And that, I think, is the kind of love I've been searching for all along. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not with her. Not like that. But the thing about life with Emma is that it never followed any rules. We've been best friends for years, long enough that she knew every version of me. Who I was when I was broken, who I was when I was stupid, who I was when I thought I had everything figured out. And she never left. Not once. Even when I probably deserved to be left. For the longest time, it felt like we were standing at the edge of something something big, something dangerous, but neither of us ever made the jump. We joked about it sometimes, late at night when everything felt a little too close, but we always pulled back before things got serious. It was safer that way, until the night it wasn't. It was late. One of those quiet nights that sneak up on you when you think the world is finally giving you a break. Emma showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and that grin of hers that always made it hard to say no. "Got room for one more?" she asked, already kicking off her shoes as she stepped inside. We ended up on my couch, as we always did, legs tangled and wine glasses forgotten on the table. It was easy, the way it always was with her. Too easy. But there was something different in the air that night. Something electric, something waiting. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked suddenly, her voice low, like she was afraid to break the moment. "Think about what?" She gave me that look, the one that always made my heart skip a beat, even when I pretended it didn't. "Us." I laughed, trying to keep things light. "What about us?" "You know what I mean," she said, her eyes locked on mine. "What if we weren't just this?" I could have made a joke, could have laughed it off the way I always did. But instead, I leaned in and kissed her. It was slow at first, gentle, careful, like we were testing the waters. But then everything between us cracked open, and the kiss deepened, all urgency and years of pent-up feelings neither of us had dared to name. We stumbled into my bedroom, hands in each other's hair, clothes hitting the floor in a trail behind us. And for a little while, everything felt perfect, like we'd finally stopped running from the thing we'd been too scared to admit was always there. Afterward, we lay there in the dark, her head resting on my chest, our bodies tangled in a way that felt so right it hurt. I wanted to say something, wanted to ask her what this meant, where we were supposed to go from here, but the words stuck in my throat. "This doesn't change anything, right?" she whispered, her voice soft against my skin. I knew what she meant. She was asking if we could stay us, if we could pretend that we hadn't just blown up everything we thought we knew about each other. And I should have told her the truth, that it had already changed everything, that I didn't know how to be her friend without wanting more. But instead, I kissed the top of her head and said, "Right, nothing has to change." But everything did. We tried to act normal after that, went back to our routines, our inside jokes, the way we always fit into each other's lives like missing puzzle pieces. But every time we ended up in bed together, it felt a little harder to pretend, harder to keep my heart out of it. I thought maybe, just maybe, she felt the same. I caught it in the way she looked at me sometimes, like she was on the verge of saying something important, but never quite got there. I told myself that she just needed time, that if I held on long enough, she'd realize that what we had could be real. But then one night, everything shattered. She was sitting on my bed, pulling on her shoes, when she dropped the bomb without even looking at me. "So, I met someone." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I try to play it cool, try to keep my voice steady. "Oh yeah? That's great." She glanced up, her expression careful. "Are you okay with that?" And that was the moment. The moment I could have told her everything. That I wasn't okay, that I loved her, that every time she left my bed it felt like the world got a little darker. But instead, I gave her the same smile I'd been giving her for years and said, "Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I be?" She smiled back, and just like that, the door between us closed. After that, things started to unravel. We still hung out, still talked, still pretended we were the same people we'd always been. But every conversation felt a little more forced, every touch a little more distant. And slowly, painfully, we started to drift apart. The last time we saw each other, we hugged goodbye, and it felt like saying farewell to something much bigger than a friendship. I held on a second too long, hoping she'd feel it, hoping she'd know that I wasn't ready to let her go. But when we pulled apart, she just smiled, soft and sad, and said, "Take care, okay?" And then she was gone. It's been months now, and I still think about her. I still catch myself scrolling through old photos, replaying conversations in my head, wondering where it all went wrong. I wonder if she ever thinks about me, if she misses what we had, or if I'm just a story she tells herself late at night when the world gets too quiet. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best thing you'll ever do or the worst mistake you'll ever make. For me, it was both. For a little while, I had her. I had everything. And then, just like that, it was gone. Would I do it all over again? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wishes I'd never kissed her, that we'd stayed on the safe side of the line where everything made sense. But another part of me knows I wouldn't change a thing. Because even though it ended, even though it hurt more than I ever thought it would, I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, she was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone without holding anything back. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. We call it the homecoming dumpster incident. It started as a harmless prank, like most things do, and ended with half the football team in a dumpster, the fire department being called, and at least one teacher openly weeping. Let me set the scene. It was the night of the homecoming game. Our school lived for homecoming. It was a bigger deal than prom. The whole town showed up, parents and alumni filled the bleachers, and the football team was determined to win, which they almost never did. The marching band had been practicing for months, the cheerleaders had perfected their routines, and everyone was buzzing with excitement. Everyone except for us. We weren't exactly school spirit people. My friends Tyler, Mark, and Emily. We were more of the hang out under the bleachers and make fun of everything type. So, when the rest of the student body was hyped up for the big game, we were brainstorming ways to survive the night without dying of boredom. That's when Tyler came up with the worst idea I've ever heard. "Okay," he said, cracking open a soda like he was about to share the meaning of life. "What if we steal the mascot?" The mascot was a giant, sweaty eagle costume named Swoopy. And let me tell you, Swoopy was sacred. Whoever wore the costume was treated like royalty. Swoopy hyped up the crowd, danced on the sidelines, and got carried off the field after every win, which again, rarely happened. Taking the mascot was the kind of prank that could get you banned from graduation. Naturally, we were all in. Our plan was simple. While the game was in full swing, we'd sneak down to the locker room, grab the Swoopy costume, and stash it in the old metal dumpster behind the school until after the game. Harmless, right? The mascot would be safe, no one would get hurt, and we'd have the ultimate bragging rights. So, at halftime, we slipped away from the bleachers and made our way to the locker room. No one even noticed us leave. Everyone was too busy watching the band's questionable rendition of Eye of the Tiger. We slipped down the hallway, hearts pounding, trying to stay quiet as we reached the mascot's closet. And there it was, the Swoopy costume in all its awkward, oversized glory, hanging on a hook like a giant feathery temptation. It looked ridiculous. The eagle's googly eyes were slightly crooked, and the beak was cracked from years of abuse. But to us, it was a golden trophy. Tyler yanked it off the hook and grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. "We are going to be legends," he whispered. That's when Mark made a terrible suggestion. Someone should put it on. Now, any reasonable group of friends would have said, absolutely not. But we were not reasonable, and Tyler was already halfway into the costume before anyone could stop him. Within minutes, he was waddling around the locker room like a drunk bird, flapping his wings and squawking like a lunatic. "Behold, Swoopy has risen," Tyler shouted, doing the world's worst victory dance. We were dying with laughter. It was perfect. It was stupid. It was so us. And that's when everything went to hell. See, what we didn't know was that the mascot costume had a hidden feature. Some genius had wired the costume with a built-in speaker that played the school fight song whenever you pressed a button on the wing. And Tyler, being Tyler, accidentally hit the button while doing a terrible cartwheel. Suddenly, the locker room was filled with the sound of the fight song, blasting at full volume. It echoed down the halls, so loud it felt like the walls were shaking. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. "We are so screwed." Before we could react, we heard voices, teachers, coaches, angry football players coming down the hall. "Leave the costume," I hissed. "We gotta go." But Tyler, determined to make things worse, tried to waddle out of the locker room, still wearing Swoopy. He tripped over the oversized eagle feet, face planted into a bench, and popped right back up like a cartoon character. "Guys, I got this," he shouted as if confidence could somehow save us. It couldn't. We sprinted down the hallway, dragging Tyler Swoopy behind us, and burst out the back door of the school. And there it was, the old metal dumpster, waiting for us like a grim sanctuary. "Get in!" Mark yelled. Tyler, still in full eagle mode, jumped into the dumpster with a loud clang. We scrambled in after him, trying to pull the heavy lid down just as the door to the building slammed open behind us. We peeked through the crack of the lid and saw the football team charging out, led by Coach Martinez, who looked like he was ready to murder someone. "Find Swoopy," Martinez bellowed. "No one touches the eagle." We sat in the dumpster, shaking with silent laughter, watching the team fan out across the parking lot like they were hunting for a lost puppy. Tyler, still inside the costume, gave us 2 awkward thumbs up from under the giant eagle head. That's when it started to rain. Hard. The dumpster lid wasn't exactly watertight, and within minutes, we were sitting in a puddle of freezing water, trying not to scream from how ridiculous the whole situation was. Tyler's eagle feathers were soaked. The fight song was still playing faintly from the speaker, and Mark was doing his best not to hyperventilate from laughing so hard. And just when we thought things couldn't get worse, the fire alarm went off. Apparently, some poor janitor saw the locker room door open and thought it was a break-in, so he pulled the fire alarm to evacuate the building. Within seconds, the school was swarming with flashing lights, blaring sirens, and fire trucks rolling into the parking lot. "Guys," Emily whispered, "we are going to jail." We sat in the dumpster, soaking wet, watching the chaos unfold like we were front-row spectators at the dumbest play ever written. Teachers were yelling, students were running in every direction, and the fire department was trying to figure out why there was a mascot costume involved in what they thought was a legitimate emergency. And then, like the cherry on top of the world's worst Sunday, the dumpster started rolling. The rain must have loosened the wheels, because before we knew it, the dumpster was moving, rolling down the slight slope of the parking lot. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Mark screamed, clutching the sides. "Stop it!" We tried to stop the dumpster, but it was too late. The wheels hit a puddle, the whole thing tipped slightly, and just like that, we were rolling down the parking lot like a runaway circus act. The dumpster finally hit a curb and tipped over, spilling all 4 of us and one very soggy mascot onto the wet pavement right in front of the fire chief, the principal, and about 50 horrified students. There was dead silence. And then Tyler, lying flat on his back in the soaking wet swoopy costume, looked up at the crowd and said the only thing he could. "Caw." The principal just stared at us, like he couldn't decide whether to laugh, cry, or expel us on the spot. The fire chief shook his head, muttering, "Kids these days," and walked off, probably to tell the weirdest story of his career. In the end, no one got suspended. Tyler had to apologize to the football team, but even Coach Martinez couldn't stop laughing when he saw the video of Swoopy rolling out of the dumpster. The video, of course, went viral within hours. And to this day, whenever someone mentions homecoming, Tyler just grins and says, "Caw." And honestly, it's perfect. This happened just last week, and I don't know how much longer I can pretend it didn't. I work as a night janitor for an office building downtown. It's one of those weird jobs that's quiet, lonely, but kind of peaceful in its own way. I usually clock in around 10 p.m. and work until 5 a.m., cleaning empty conference rooms and hallways that feel more like liminal spaces the longer you stay in them. I've been doing this job for almost 2 years, and nothing strange has ever happened. Until now. It started like any other night. I showed up, grabbed my cart, and began my routine. The office building is 9 floors, but I only handle the top 3. At night, the building is dead silent. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional hiss from the air vents. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little noise, like your own breathing. I was halfway through cleaning the 7th floor when I noticed something strange. The elevator doors at the end of the hallway were open. That wasn't supposed to happen. The elevators shut down at night unless someone calls them, and I hadn't touched them. But there they were, wide open, humming softly, waiting. I figured maybe maintenance had left them that way, so I didn't think too much of it. I grabbed my supplies and pushed my cart toward the elevator, planning to take it up to the 8th floor. As I stepped inside and pressed the button, something felt off. The elevator smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, just wrong. Like old wood and wet cement. It was subtle, but enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The doors slid shut with a soft hiss, and the elevator began to rise. Everything seemed normal until it passed the 8th floor. I frowned. That was my stop. I tapped the button again, thinking maybe I hadn't pressed it hard enough, but the elevator kept going. The little display above the door flickered once, then twice, showing numbers that didn't make sense. 9, 10, 11. There were only 9 floors in the building. I stared at the numbers, confusion turning to dread. The elevator continued to climb, the hum of the motor deepening, as if the building itself was stretching taller with every passing second. Then it stopped. The display read 13. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a long, dim hallway I had never seen before. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, the kind you'd find in an old hotel, something out of time, with peeling edges and a sickly green tint. The air that drifted in felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. And at the far end of the hallway, just barely visible in the dim light, was a single door. It was slightly open, just a crack. I stared at the hallway, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to stay inside the elevator. But the doors didn't close. They just stayed open, waiting. And then I heard it. From somewhere down the hallway, a voice. Soft, faint, and just familiar enough to make my blood run cold. "Hey, is someone there?" It was my voice. I froze, my entire body locking up with fear. It wasn't an echo or a trick of the building's acoustics. It was exactly my voice, as if I had spoken from the other side of that open door. "Hello," it called again, a little louder this time. "Can you hear me?" I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice, my voice, sounded tired, desperate, like it had been waiting there for a long, long time. "Come here," it whispered. "Please, I need your help." I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear. Every fiber of my being told me not to leave the elevator, not to step into that hallway. But there was this awful pull, like gravity itself was tugging me toward that door. I wanted to run. I wanted to press the button and ride the elevator back to reality. But my legs refused to listen. And then the voice changed. It dropped lower, becoming something deeper, older, something that didn't belong in this world. "You're already here." The words slithered through the air, wrapping around me like a cold hand. And before I could react, the door at the end of the hallway creaked open, just a little wider. I saw something standing behind it. A shape, tall, thin, wrong. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending the wrong way, and its head tilted unnaturally to one side. But the worst part? It smiled, not with lips or teeth, but with its eyes. They widened, glimmering with a kind of glee that made me want to crawl out of my own skin. And then it started to move, slowly, deliberately, toward the elevator. That's when I snapped out of it. I slammed my hand against the closed door button, praying that the elevator would respond. For a horrifying moment, the doors didn't move. The thing in the hallway tilted its head further, like it was curious, like it knew the elevator wouldn't save me. But then, with a merciful hiss, the door slid shut. The elevator lurched downward, the motor groaning as it dropped floor by floor. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real, that it was some stress-induced hallucination or a weird dream. But when the elevator stopped and the doors opened, I wasn't on the ground floor. I was back on the 7th floor. Everything looked the same as before, dim hallways, empty offices, but I could feel it deep in my bones. Something was wrong. I pushed the car back to the security office and clocked out without saying a word. I haven't gone back since. But here's the thing. The night after it happened, I got a text. It was from the building's main line. "We still need you on floor 13. And sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet, I hear the hum of an elevator passing by, and I know it's waiting for me. The next time those doors open, I won't get away." It started out like any other lazy afternoon, me killing time, waiting for the summer to end. I'd gone over to my friend Tyler's place to grab some stuff he'd borrowed from me, but he wasn't home. His mom, Emma, answered the door instead. She smiled when she saw me, that same familiar smile I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. "Ty's out," she said, leaning on the doorframe. "Won't be back until later. Want to come in and wait?" I should have said no. I had no reason to stay. But the way she smiled, with just a hint of playfulness, made me step inside. Emma was captivating in a way I'd never noticed before. She wasn't flashy, just effortlessly beautiful, the kind of beauty that sneaks up on you. Long dark hair, sharp green eyes, and this calm, unbothered energy that made you want to be near her. I always knew Tyler's mom was attractive, but I'd never let myself really think about it. Until that day, we sat in the living room, just chatting. She offered me a drink, and before I knew it, we were sipping iced tea, laughing about nothing in particular. It felt normal, comfortable, even, but there was something under the surface. Something dangerous. "You've grown up a lot," she said at one point, her eyes lingering on me a second too long. I chuckled awkwardly, brushing it off. "Yeah, I guess that happens." She smiled again, slow and knowing, like she just told a joke only she understood. I should have left right then, made up some excuse, and walked out the door. But I didn't. Instead, we kept talking, the conversation drifting into places it probably shouldn't have. She told me how lonely the house felt with Tyler gone so often, how strange it was to realize that her son had grown up and moved on. "I guess I just didn't expect things to change so quickly," she said softly, her voice full of something I couldn't quite name. And then she touched my arm. Just a small, fleeting touch, but it sent a shock through me. "I always liked you," she said, her fingers lingering on my skin. "You were different from Tyler's other friends." There was a moment, a split second where I could have laughed it off, made a joke, or just walked out. But instead, I stayed. And then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, we kissed. It wasn't hesitant or awkward. It was intense, like all the things we hadn't said were spilling out at once. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, and before I knew it, we were on the couch, limbs tangled, breathless and reckless. I knew it was wrong. Knew that this was Tyler's mom, and that I was crossing a line I'd never be able to uncross. But it didn't stop me. Nothing could have stopped me. When it was over, we lay there in silence, the weight of what we'd done settling over us like a thick fog. "This can't happen again," she whispered, though there was no conviction in her voice. "I know," I muttered, knowing full well it was a lie. And it was. The next day, she texted me. Just a casual message. "Thanks for yesterday," smiley face, but the meaning behind it was clear. And just like that, I was hooked. We started sneaking around, meeting whenever Tyler wasn't home. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once, like playing with fire and daring it to burn you. Every time we told ourselves it was the last. And every time, we fell deeper into something we couldn't escape. The guilt was unbearable every time I saw Tyler. He had no idea what was going on. No clue that the friend he trusted the most was betraying him in the worst way possible. Every time he smiled at me or invited me over, it felt like a knife twisting deeper in my chest. But I kept going back to Emma. It was only a matter of time before it all fell apart. One night, Tyler came home earlier than expected. We thought we had more time. We didn't. He walked in on us, me and Emma, too close, our hands still tangled together on the couch. For a moment, the room froze, and then everything shattered at once. "What the fuck?" Tyler whispered, his voice low and trembling. I jumped up, panic surging through me. "Tyler, it's not." "Don't you fucking lie to me," he shouted, stepping forward, his eyes blazing with rage. Emma tried to explain, but Tyler wasn't listening. His fists clenched at his sides, his whole body shaking with fury. "You were my best friend," he said, his voice cracking. "How could you do this to me? With her?" I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. There were no words that could make this right. "Get the hell out," Tyler growled, his voice sharp and broken. "Tyler, please. Get out." I left without another word, the sound of the door slamming behind me ringing in my ears. Emma texted me later that night, but I didn't respond. Whatever we'd shared was gone, ruined by the weight of everything we'd destroyed. Tyler blocked me on everything. Phone, social media, the works. I tried once to apologize, but it was pointless. I knew there was no going back. It's been a couple of years now, and I still think about that day. About the moment I could have stopped everything, but didn't. The moment I threw away a friendship for something fleeting and impossible. Some mistakes fade with time, but not this one. This one stays with you, buried deep in your chest, like a wound that never really heals. And this one will haunt me for the rest of my life. It started with the rain, not the soft, romantic kind that makes you want to curl up under a blanket with a book, the kind that comes down in cold sheets, soaking through your clothes and making the world feel smaller, like it's closing in around you. I hadn't planned on going out. I'd already changed into sweats, half wrapped in a blanket, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, content with the idea of doing nothing. But then the text came through. Come meet us. Drinks are cheap, and you can't sit in your apartment forever. I stared at the message, weighing my options. I knew what the smart choice was. Stay in, watch a movie, avoid the inevitable regret that always follows these nights. But the thought of spending another evening alone, listening to the rain beat against my windows, felt heavier than any hangover ever could. I'll be there in 20. By the time I got to the bar, the rain had only gotten worse, plastering my hair to my head and sending icy water trickling down my back. I stepped inside, shaking off the cold as the warm hum of the bar wrapped around me. The place was packed, people crammed together, sharing booths, leaning over each other to order drinks, filling the space with laughter and noise that felt just loud enough to drown out my thoughts. And that's when I saw him. He was leaning against the bar, sipping a beer, and looking perfectly at ease, like the storm outside hadn't touched him at all. His dark jacket was unzipped, and his hair was still a little damp, but he didn't seem to mind. There was a quietness about him, a calm, steady presence that felt like the eye of a storm. He glanced my way, caught me looking, and gave me a small, crooked smile. Not the kind that says I caught you staring, more like I see you, and I'm glad you're here. It wasn't the smile of someone looking for a hookup. It was worse. It was the smile of someone who makes you feel seen. And that's how it always starts. I didn't wait for an invitation. I slid onto the bar stool next to him, feeling the buzz of possibility settling into my chest. Riding out the storm here, too? I asked, nodding toward the window where the rain streaked against the glass. He gave a little shrug, tilting his beer toward me. Seems like a good place to get stuck. And just like that, we were off. The conversation started slow, the way all good ones do. A few harmless questions, some light teasing, little stories about nothing that slowly grew into something. He was funny, quietly, effortlessly funny in that way some people are when they're not trying to impress you. And the way he listened, the way his gaze stayed steady on me even when I stumbled over my words, it felt dangerous in all the right ways. We ordered more drinks. The bar got louder. Time slipped away, and before I knew it, I was laughing too hard at something that wasn't even that funny, leaning into him like the space between us had become too small to keep ignoring. His hand found mine under the bar, fingers brushing lightly, and it felt like electricity sparking between us. It was inevitable, really, the kind of night that pulls you under before you even realize you're sinking. "You want to get out of here?" he asked, his voice low, like the question was meant just for me. I nodded, already knowing the answer. "Yeah, let's go." We stepped out into the rain, and instead of running from it, we laughed, giddy and drunk, splashing through puddles like we were kids again. His hand found the small of my back, guiding me through the slick streets, and every touch felt deliberate, like a promise that didn't need words. By the time we reached his apartment, we were soaked through, shivering, and too far gone to care. We kissed in the hallway before the door even shut, water dripping from our hair, our clothes clinging to our skin. Everything about it was fast and reckless. Hands fumbling with zippers, mouths colliding with desperate urgency, the rain still clinging to us like a second skin. We didn't talk much after that. There was no need. We fell into bed together, wet clothes discarded in a messy pile on the floor, bodies finding their rhythm easily, as if we'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. It was the kind of sex that feels less like a choice and more like a compulsion, like something you can't stop even if you wanted to. And for a while, it was perfect. Just the two of us, tangled in sheets, skin against skin, the outside world slipping further and further away. But mornings don't let you stay in those moments for long. I woke up before he did, sunlight leaking through the blinds in soft streaks that cut across the room. His arm was slung over me, heavy and warm, and I could hear the rain still tapping lightly against the window. For a second, I stayed still, letting myself pretend that this was something more than what it was. That the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, was enough to keep the emptiness at bay. But it never is. It never really is. I slid out from under his arm as quietly as I could, gathering my clothes from the floor, each piece feeling heavier than it had the night before. There's always something surreal about getting dressed in a stranger's apartment. The way your clothes feel tighter, like they belong to someone else now. He stirred just as I slipped on my shoes, his voice thick with sleep. "Leaving already?" I turned, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, got a lot to do today." He nodded, rubbing a hand through his hair. "Well, it was a good night." "Yeah," I whispered. "It was..." And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb felt colder than it should have, the rain still falling in soft sheets, soaking through my clothes all over again. I ordered an Uber and huddled under an awning, wrapping my coat around me, but it didn't help. The cold wasn't just on the outside, it was inside, settling deep in my bones, familiar and unwanted. The ride home was quiet, the driver making small talk I wasn't in the mood for. I stared out the window, watching the rain blur the city lights into smudges of yellow and white, and tried to convince myself that this was fine, that this was what I wanted. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about me, about the way I keep diving headfirst into these moments, hoping they'll fill the spaces inside me, only to find that they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed without even bothering to change. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and indifferent, offering no answers. Just silence. I wish I could say that was the last time, that I learned how to stop searching for something in strangers' beds. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe someday I'll stop, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll keep going one night at a time, hoping that eventually one of these mornings will feel different. But until then, all I can do is keep moving forward. One kiss, one drink, one morning after the next. It was nearly 2:30 a.m. when I found myself parked outside the old lookout point. I hadn't been here in years. Not since high school, when we used to sneak up here to drink stolen beers and talk about everything we swore we'd do once we got out of town. Back then, the view from the cliff made the world feel huge, like anything was possible. Now, sitting alone in my car with the engine ticking softly in the cool night air, it just felt small. I wasn't sure why I'd come. Something about the night, too quiet, too heavy, had driven me here without me realizing. I had the urge to get out and look at the city lights below, to feel that old spark of possibility again. But instead, I just sat there, staring at my phone, scrolling through texts I'd never sent. And then, as if the night couldn't resist throwing me one more curveball, a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. A car pulled in behind mine, tires crunching over gravel, and for a second, my heart raced. No way. But then she stepped out of the driver's side, and there she was, Eva. Eva was a ghost from another lifetime. The last time I saw her, we were 19 and swore we'd stay in touch forever, because that's what you do when you're young and stupid enough to think distance won't change things. But life had other plans. Texts stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. And just like that, she was gone. Yet here she was, standing a few feet away, hands in the pockets of her oversized jacket, looking at me like she couldn't quite believe I was real. "Well, shit," she said, a small grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. "If it isn't you." I opened the door and climbed out, the cool night air wrapping around me like a familiar but unwanted hug. "Eva." She tilted her head, studying me the way someone does when they're not sure if they're happy or sad to see you. "What are you doing here?" I gave a half shrug. "Could ask you the same thing." She smiled, a soft, wistful thing. "Touché." For a minute, we just stood there, letting the awkwardness settle between us. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comfortable either. Too many unsaid things lingering between the past and the present, waiting for someone to be brave enough to speak first. "You want to sit?" I asked, nodding toward the edge of the lookout. She hesitated, like she was weighing her options, but then she smiled and said, "Yeah, why not?" We sat down on the old wooden railing, our legs dangling over the edge like we used to back in the day. The view was just as I remembered. city lights twinkling far below, the stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled them there by accident. Eva leaned back on her hands, the moonlight catching in her dark hair. "Crazy how nothing's changed," she murmured. "Yeah," I said. "And somehow, everything has." She glanced over at me, her smile soft and sad. "You still poetic as hell, huh? Trying to tone it down," I said with a grin. She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. And for a second, it felt like no time had passed at all. We talked for a while, the way you do when you're trying to catch up but not sure where to start. She told me she'd come back to visit her folks, just for a few days. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Figured I'd come out here for old time's sake." I nodded. "Same." We slipped into a rhythm, swapping stories about the years we'd missed, glossing over the rough parts with the kind of ease that only old friends can pull off. She told me about her job, something involving marketing, though she didn't sound too excited about it. I told her about mine, and she laughed when I admitted I still wasn't entirely sure what I was doing with my life. "At least you're consistent," she teased, nudging me with her shoulder. "Some things never change," I muttered, but I couldn't help smiling. At some point, the conversation drifted to the past, the way it always does with people like us. People who tried to leave, but never quite managed to outrun the memories. "You ever think about those nights?" she asked, her voice quiet. "All the time," I admitted. "You?" She gave a small nod, her gaze fixed on the lights below. "Yeah, more than I probably should." We sat with that for a moment, the weight of what we hadn't said pressing down on us like a familiar, well-worn blanket. "I always wondered," I said softly, "why you stopped calling." She looked down at her hands, fiddling with the zipper of her jacket. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. I don't know. Life got messy." "Yeah," I said. "It does that." Eva sighed, her breath curling into the cold night air. "I thought about calling so many times, but then it felt too late, you know?" I nodded because I did know. I knew exactly how that felt. We fell into a comfortable silence after that, the kind that only comes with old friends. Two people sitting together in the quiet, no longer trying to fix what went wrong. After a while, Eva leaned her head against my shoulder, just like she used to when we were kids. I didn't move. It felt right, like we'd found our way back to something we thought we'd lost. "You think we could have gotten it right?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my gaze fixed on the distant glow of the city. "I don't know. Maybe." She smiled, and I could feel the warmth of it even in the dark. "Yeah, maybe." The night stretched on, the stars watching silently as we sat there. Two people with a complicated past and an uncertain future, finding solace in the in-between. "I'm glad I saw you tonight," she said after a while, her voice warm and honest. "Me too," I whispered. And for the first time in years, it felt like enough. When the first light of dawn started to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, we knew it was time to go. Eva stood up first, brushing the dust off her jeans. "Guess we should head back." "Yeah," I said, though part of me didn't want the night to end. She gave me one last look, a small, knowing smile that held all the things we couldn't say. "Take care of yourself, okay?" "You too, Eva." She hesitated for just a moment, then leaned in and pressed a soft, fleeting kiss to my cheek. And then she was gone, slipping back into the car and disappearing down the winding road, leaving me standing there under the fading stars. I stayed for a while, watching the sun rise over the city, the world waking up slowly beneath my feet. And as the sky turned brighter and the air grew warmer, I realized that not every story needs a perfect ending. Sometimes it's enough just to know that you were there, together, if only for a little while. And for now, that was enough. It started with me trying to change the batteries in the TV remote. Should have been easy. Open the back, swap out the old ones, boom, problem solved. But of course, nothing in life is that simple. The remote had been dying for weeks. I'd been squeezing every last bit of life out of those batteries, shaking it, flipping them around like some ancient ritual might bring them back to life. And sometimes it worked for about 3 clicks. Then it would stop responding again, and I'd sit there, pointing it at the TV like a magician, try to summon spirits, pressing the same button harder, as if that would make a difference. Tonight, I finally admitted defeat. I grabbed a new pack of batteries from the drawer, sat down with the remote, and that's when things started going wrong. The back cover refused to come off. I pushed, slid, wiggled it, nothing. It was like the remote had decided it was going to die with dignity, batteries and all. I tried using my fingernails, prying at the edges, muttering things that would make my grandma wash my mouth out with soap. Still no luck. At this point, I was getting sweaty. It's humbling, really, when something as simple as a plastic cover makes you question your entire life. Determined not to be outsmarted by an inanimate object, I grabbed a butter knife from the kitchen and started prying it under the cover, hoping brute force would do the trick. It did not. The knife slipped, and I managed to slice a neat little scratch into my thumb. Fantastic, I muttered, staring at the tiny wound. Now I was bleeding. Over batteries. But I wasn't giving up. Not tonight. I grabbed a roll of duct tape from the closet, ripped off a piece, and stuck it to the back of the remote, thinking I'd pull it off with sheer adhesive strength. Genius, right? Wrong. The tape stuck to the plastic cover too well. I yanked, and the cover stayed right where it was. Only now the duct tape was fused to it like a permanent accessory. Great. Now I had a remote with a weird gray patch, and still no working batteries. I sat there, clutching the remote in one hand and the useless duct tape in the other, feeling the quiet shame of defeat creeping in. This was supposed to take 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and now I had a bleeding thumb, a sticky remote, and a growing sense that adulthood was just a series of minor tasks that always spiral into existential crises. The cat jumped up onto the coffee table and sat down directly in front of me, staring. It was the same look she gives me when I'm trying to assemble IKEA furniture. Equal parts pity and condescension. Éclaire here. Don't judge me. She blinked slowly. Judging me? With one last burst of frustration, I twisted the remote hard in my hands. And miraculously, the cover slid off with a tiny click. I stared at it, stunned like I just cracked the code to the universe. Finally, the batteries lay inside, tired and corroded, looking like they'd fought a good fight and lost. I swapped them out for the new ones, slid the cover back on, and held the remote up triumphantly. This was it. Victory at last. I pointed it at the TV, hit the power button, and nothing happened. Are you kidding me? I hissed, jabbing the button harder, because apparently I hadn't learned anything from the past hour. The TV remained stubbornly dark, as if to say, "Nice try, idiot." I checked the batteries. They were incorrectly. I tried pressing every button on the remote, hoping one of them might miraculously spark life into the TV. Still nothing. And that's when I noticed the TV wasn't even plugged in. I stared at the empty socket like it was some kind of cruel joke, the kind of thing you only notice after you've gone through all 5 stages of grief. I reached behind the TV, fumbled for the cord, and plugged it in with a size so deep I think I felt my soul leave my body for a second. The screen flickered to life. The TV was on. The remote worked. It was over. I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted from what should have been the easiest task in the world. The cat jumped up beside me, curling into a loaf shape like she hadn't just witnessed the single dumbest thing I'd ever done. I grabbed the remote, scrolled through the streaming options, and picked the first show I saw. At this point, it didn't matter what I watched. I just needed something mindless to erase the memory of the last 40 minutes. But of course, the universe wasn't done with me yet. Just as the episode started, I noticed it, the low battery icon flashing in the corner of the screen. The remote batteries were already dying. I stared at the icon in disbelief, feeling my sanity slowly unraveling. You gotta be kidding me. The cat purred beside me, smug and content, as if she'd known this would happen all along. And that's when I did the only logical thing I could. I turned off the TV, set the remote on the table, and accepted my fate. Maybe the batteries would last a few more clicks. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't dealing with it tonight. Some battles just aren't worth fighting. The first time I tried flirting at an ice skating rink, I almost concussed myself with a traffic cone. I wish I were kidding. It started because my friend Nate, a self-proclaimed hockey god, decided that the best way to spend a Saturday night was dragging me to the local rink. It's perfect, he said. You skate around, fall a couple of times, and boom, instant icebreaker. Girls love it. In theory, it sounded like a good plan. In practice, I hadn't touched a pair of skates since middle school, and even back then I was bad. Like clinging to the wall while small children whiz by bad. But Nate was relentless, and against my better judgment, I agreed to go. The rink was packed when we got there. Families, couples on awkward dates, and clusters of teenagers making TikToks. I was already regretting my life choices as I laced up my skates, feeling like a newborn deer preparing to make its way into the wild. And then I saw her. She was adjusting her skates by the side of the rink, and something about her caught me completely off guard. Maybe it was the way her scarf kept slipping off her shoulder, or the way she smiled at herself every time she stumbled. It didn't matter. She looked effortlessly cool, the kind of person who probably owned an obscure record collection and drank tea out of vintage mugs. Nate noticed me staring. "Dude, just go talk to her," he said, shoving me toward the ice. "While I'm wearing these death blades?" I hissed, gesturing at my skates. "That seems like a great idea." But Nate wasn't having it. "It's easy," he said, grinning. "Fall near her. Make it cute. Girls love clumsy guys. Or they call the paramedics." I muttered. But Nate was already skating off, leaving me stranded by the edge. With no better plan, I took a deep breath, stepped onto the ice, and immediately regretted everything. My legs wobbled like spaghetti, and my arms flailed wildly as I tried to stay upright. I clung to the wall for dear life, inching my way around the rink like I was attempting to defuse a bomb. That's when she skated by, gracefully, effortlessly, her scarf trailing behind her like she was in a movie scene. This was my moment. I just needed to let go of the wall. So, naturally, I let go, and immediately fell. It wasn't a graceful fall, either. I went down hard, arms pinwheeling, legs flying out from under me like I was auditioning for a slapstick comedy. My knee hit the ice with a loud thud, and before I could recover, I heard a voice above me. "Whoa, are you okay?" I looked up, and there she was, leaning down with a concerned smile. This wasn't exactly how I'd planned our first interaction, but hey, I was already on the ground. Might as well own it. "Yeah," I said, grimacing. "Just testing the ice quality. It's solid." She laughed, a bright, musical laugh that somehow made the pain worth it. "That was an impressive fall," she said. 10 out of 10 for commitment." "Thanks," I said, trying to play it cool while very much not cool. "I like to make an impact." Literally. She held out a hand to help me up, and as I grabbed it, my skates slipped again. This time, I fell forward into her, and before I knew it, we were both on the ice, tangled in a mess of arms, legs, and scarves. "Oh my God!" I groaned. "I just body slammed you. I am so sorry." She was laughing too hard to answer, and honestly, her laugh was infectious. Soon, we were both sitting on the ice, gasping for breath between fits of laughter, like two idiots who'd forgotten they were supposed to be embarrassed. "Okay," she said, finally catching her breath. "That was the best fall I've ever seen. Are you sure you're not a professional?" "Not unless falling counts as a sport," I muttered, grinning. She smiled, brushing a bit of snow off her scarf. "I'm Lily, by the way." "Jake," I said, giving her a little salute from the ground. "Professional human hazard." Before I could say anything else, one of the rink staff skated over, holding a neon orange traffic cone. "Here," the guy said, setting the cone next to me with a smirk. "This should help." Lily tried to hide her laugh behind her scarf. "A traffic cone? Seriously?" "Hey," I said, grabbing the cone with mock seriousness. "Every great athlete has to start somewhere." She laughed again, this bright, infectious sound that made me forget about the ice, the fall, and the fact that I probably had bruises forming. "Come on," she said, standing up and offering me her hand. "Let's see if you can make it around the rink without taking out anyone else." With the traffic cone in one hand and Lily's hand in the other, I somehow managed to get back on my feet. We skated while she skated, and I wobbled along like a baby giraffe. And every time I stumbled, she'd squeeze my hand and say, "You've got this, Sheriff." She started calling me Sheriff after spotting my absurdly cheap sheriff badge from Halloween, which I'd forgotten to take off my jacket. It's a long story. By the time we made it halfway around the rink, I'd almost convinced myself that I was getting the hang of it. Almost. And then I tripped over the traffic cone. It went flying, spinning wildly across the ice, while I landed flat on my back with a groan. I braced myself for the embarrassment to hit, but instead, Lily doubled over, laughing so hard she had to lean on me for support. "You," she gasped between giggles, "are the worst skater I've ever seen." "Thanks," I muttered, grinning up at her. I aimed to impress. She helped me up again because apparently I couldn't go 5 minutes without needing assistance. And this time, we both made it around the rink without any major disasters. When the rink lights dimmed and the staff started ushering people off the ice, I felt a weird twinge of disappointment. I didn't want the night to end. Not yet. "So," I said, trying to sound casual as we shuffled toward the exit, "any chance I can buy you a hot chocolate? You know, as thanks for saving my life." Multiple times. She grinned, adjusting her scarf. "Only if you promise not to spill it." "No promises," I said, grinning back. "But I'll try." And just like that, we walked off the ice together, me still wobbling like a disaster waiting to happen, and her laughing beside me every step of the way. It wasn't the smoothest night. It definitely wasn't my most coordinated. But somehow, against all odds, I'd managed to turn a traffic cone, a wipeout, and a lot of awkwardness into something kind of wonderful. And honestly, that felt like a win. We met on a Sunday morning at a farmer's market. I was half awake, holding a latte too hot to drink, wandering through stalls of vegetables I had no intention of buying. He was standing at a booth selling homemade jams, laughing with the vendor about how his dog had eaten an entire loaf of bread off his kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his laugh was contagious, and before I knew it, I was smiling too. He noticed. "You gotta admit," he said, catching my eye, "there's something impressive about a dog with that level of ambition." I laughed. Or self-destruction. We ended up walking through the market together. He bought a jar of jam, I grabbed a basket of peaches, and somehow, what should have been a 20-minute stroll turned into 2 hours. Before we left, he asked for my number. "You seem like someone I should know," he said, his tone casual, like he wasn't fully aware of how much weight those words would carry later. And just like that, something began. Our first few dates were perfect, not in the over-the-top, movie magic way, but in the quiet, real way that makes you feel like maybe life isn't always out to hurt you. We grabbed coffee, walked dogs, and spent a whole rainy afternoon trying, and failing, to bake cookies without setting off my smoke alarm. He wasn't trying too hard to impress me, and that felt like a relief. He was just himself. I let my guard down, slowly at first, then all at once. With him, it felt like maybe I didn't need to protect myself all the time. Maybe I could just be, without worrying about whether or not he'd leave. And for a while it felt like he wouldn't, until he did. It started with little things, texts that took longer to arrive, plans that became tentative instead of certain. He stopped calling just to say goodnight, and when we were together, he felt distant, like his body was in the room, but his mind was somewhere else. I asked him about it, trying not to sound too worried. "Is everything okay?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." I nodded, pretending that was enough. But it wasn't. Not really. The next few weeks felt like holding on to the end of a fraying rope, watching it slowly unravel in my hands. I kept trying to pull us back together, kept showing up, kept hoping that if I was patient enough, understanding enough, things would go back to the way they were. But the harder I tried, the further he drifted. One night, after canceling plans for the second time that week, he sent me a text. "Can we talk tomorrow? There's some stuff I've been thinking about." My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming, had known for a while if I'm being honest, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. The next day he called. He didn't drag it out. "I care about you a lot," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "but I don't think I can give you what you're looking for right now." There it was, the polite breakup, the kind where they let you down as softly as possible, as if kindness can make the landing hurt less. I wanted to ask him why he made me feel safe, only to walk away the moment I started to believe in us. But instead, I just whispered, "Okay," because what else could I say? When someone makes up their mind to leave, all the questions in the world won't make them stay. And that was it. No fight, no dramatic ending. Just a quiet goodbye wrapped in good intentions. The silence that followed felt like a weight I couldn't shake. I kept replaying our conversations, trying to pinpoint the moment it all went wrong. But the truth is, some people leave not because of anything you did, but because they don't know how to stay. and knowing that doesn't make it hurt any less. I deleted his number, muted him on social media, and told myself I was fine. But healing is never that simple. Some nights, I'd lie awake, scrolling through old photos and texts, wondering what would have happened if I'd done things differently. If I'd been less available, less open, if I'd played the kind of games people always say you're supposed to play in the beginning. But I'm tired of games. I want real, honest, messy love, the kind where people stay even when things get hard. And the truth is, if he couldn't give me that, then letting him go was the only choice I had. It's been a few months now, and I'm learning how to live with the absence he left behind. Some days, I feel okay, like I've finally made peace with the way things ended. Other days, the sadness sneaks up on me when I least expect it. I'll hear a song we used to listen to, or see a couple laughing together on the street, and for a moment, it feels like I'm right back where I started. But slowly, painfully slowly, I'm learning that it's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to grieve what could have been, even if it was never really mine to begin with. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to carry the sadness without letting it break you. These days, I'm focusing on myself, on building a life I love, not because I'm waiting for someone else to share it with, but because I deserve that kind of joy. I still believe in love, not the perfect fairy tale kind, but the real, flawed, complicated kind. The kind that shows up and stays, even when things get messy. And if love finds me again, I'll be ready. But this time, I won't shrink myself to fit into someone else's world. I won't settle for half efforts or almost love. I deserve more than that. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: I am enough. Just as I am, with or without someone else, I am whole. And that's the kind of peace no one can take from me. So I'll keep going, one breath at a time, one step at a time. And if someone shows up who's willing to walk beside me, that'll be a gift. But if not, I'll be just fine on my own. Because at the end of the day, I've got me, and that, I've learned, is more than enough. We told ourselves it would only happen once. That's what made it feel safe. One night, one mistake, and then we'd go back to being what we were. No drama, no fallout, no broken hearts. Just one night to get it out of our systems. But nothing that feels that good ever stays simple. It was late, too late, and I should have gone home. But of course I didn't. I never knew how to leave when it came to Cam. We've been best friends since college, and somehow, he was always the person I found myself with, no matter where life took us. It was easy with him, too easy. That night, we'd stayed out too long, drinking too much, laughing too hard. I don't even remember what we were celebrating, maybe just surviving the week. But by the time we stumbled back to his apartment, the air between us had shifted into something dangerous. He leaned against the kitchen counter, grinning at me the way he always did, like I was his favorite joke in the world. "You staying?" he asked, casual, like it didn't mean anything. "Do you want me to?" His smile faltered, just for a second. "You know I do." And just like that, the ground shifted beneath us. One moment we were standing on solid ground. The next, we were free-falling. I kissed him first, or maybe he kissed me. By then, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that we'd finally stopped pretending. Years of stolen glances, lingering touches, and unspoken feelings poured out all at once. And before I knew it, we were tangled up in his bed, breathless and reckless. It felt inevitable, like we'd been hurtling toward this moment from the very beginning, and were just too scared to admit it. And for a little while, it felt perfect. The kind of perfect you know won't last, but cling to anyway, hoping you can freeze it in place. Afterward, we lay in the dark, his arm draped over me, our bodies still buzzing from everything we couldn't say out loud. I could hear the soft rhythm of his breathing, steady and real, and for a moment I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be something more. "This doesn't have to mean anything, right?" he whispered into the quiet. I should have told him the truth. Should have said that it meant everything, that I didn't know how to go back to being just his friend. But instead, I kissed his shoulder and whispered, "Right, nothing has to change." And just like that, I let the moment slip through my fingers. For a little while, we pretended it worked. We still laughed, still stayed up too late watching stupid movies, still called each other for no reason at all. But the nights we spent in each other's beds started to blur the lines. And no matter how hard we tried to hold on to the friendship, The cracks kept getting bigger. The thing about Cam is that he never does anything halfway. When he's with you, he's all in, present in a way that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. But when he's not, it feels like standing in a room he just left, all his warmth and energy gone, leaving nothing but silence. And the silence between us was growing louder by the day. I told myself I was fine with it, that the nights we spent together were enough, even if they weren't all mine. But the truth is, I wasn't fine. I was falling for him, had been falling for him for years, and it was only getting harder to pretend I could keep my heart out of it. The breaking point came one night, as it always does. We were lying in bed, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on both of us. And before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "I love you." He went completely still beside me. And in that moment, I knew I just shattered whatever fragile thing we'd been holding on to. "Come," I whispered, my voice cracking. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, his expression twisted with something that looked a lot like regret. "You know I care about you," he said quietly. "But not like that." The words hit me like a slap, even though I'd seen it coming. I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. "Yeah, I know." He reached for me, but I shifted away, pulling the blanket tighter around myself like it could protect me from the truth. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine." I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "It's not your fault." He stayed the night, but we both knew it was over. And when morning came, he kissed me on the forehead, one last kiss that tasted like goodbye, and walked out the door. We tried to go back to being friends, but it didn't work. Every conversation felt forced, every touch awkward, every laugh laced with the knowledge of what we'd lost. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart. Not because we wanted to, but because we didn't know how to stay. It's been months now, and I still think about him. I still hear his laugh in my head, still catch myself reaching for my phone to tell him something stupid that only he'd find funny. But the texts go unsent, the calls unmade, because some things, once broken, can't be fixed. People always say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best thing you'll ever do or the worst mistake you'll ever make. For me, it was both. For a little while, I had him. And even though it ended, even though it left me with more questions than answers, I wouldn't take it back. Because some people aren't meant to stay in your life forever. Some people are just passing through, leaving behind memories that will ache long after they're gone. And even though it hurts, God, does it hurt? I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, he was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone with everything I had. And maybe, just maybe that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. This is the Pep Rally Goat incident. And yes, you read that right. There was a goat. And no, it was not supposed to be there. It all started with Josh, who had a long history of incredibly poor decision-making, but in a way that always made him seem like a lovable idiot rather than a criminal. Josh was one of those kids who somehow coasted through life on charm alone. Always in trouble, but never enough to actually get punished. You know the type. It was the Friday before our homecoming game, and the whole school was pumped for the pep rally. The cheerleaders were rehearsing, the marching band was tuning their instruments, and the football team was practicing their dramatic entrance through a giant paper banner that said, "Destroy the Cougars," in glittery red letters. Everyone was doing their part to hype up the school spirit. Everyone, that is, except Josh. "You know what this pep rally needs?" Josh said, leaning against my locker with a grin that told me I was about to make some very poor life choices. "A competent football team?" I guessed. He shook his head. "Nope, a goat." At first, I thought I'd misheard him. "A goat?" "Yes," Josh said, like this was the most obvious thing in the world. "School spirit animal. It's symbolic. Goats are like resilient or something." "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not." But Josh already had that manic glint in his eye, the one that said there was no turning back now. "I can get a goat," he said confidently. "My uncle has a farm." This was already a terrible idea, and yet I still found myself sitting in the passenger seat of Josh's mom's minivan 2 hours later, bouncing down a dirt road on the outskirts of town to borrow a goat. I'm not proud of it, but peer pressure and boredom make a dangerous combo. When we got to the farm, Josh's uncle didn't even ask questions. He just handed us the rope attached to the goat, a fat, grumpy-looking creature named Gary, and said, "Good luck." That should have been the first red flag. Gary the goat was not happy about being shoved into the back of a minivan. He bleated angrily the entire ride back to the school, stomping around and chewing on the seatbelt like he was plotting our demise. "This is going to be amazing," Josh said, beaming as Gary tried to headbutt the back window. Spoiler alert, it was not amazing. We arrived at the school about 10 minutes before the pep rally started. The plan was simple: sneak Gary into the gym, parade him around during the big entrance, and get him out before anyone realized what was happening. Quick, easy, foolproof. Unfortunately, we were fools. The first problem was that Gary did not want to cooperate. The second we pulled him out of the van, he planted all four hooves firmly on the ground and refused to move. No amount of pulling, pushing, or bribing could convince him to walk. "We need bait," Josh whispered, glancing around like he was planning a heist. "What, like carrots or something?" I asked, exasperated. "No, French fries." And that's how we ended up dragging a pissed-off goat through the side entrance of the gym, luring him along with a stolen tray of cafeteria fries. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Gary followed us, snacking angrily all the way to the gym doors. By the time we got inside, the pep rally was already in full swing. The band was playing, the cheerleaders were flipping around like acrobats, and the entire student body was screaming their heads off. It was total chaos. And into that chaos, we released Gary. It started off great. Josh strutted into the gym, with Gary trotting behind him like some kind of victorious warrior returning from battle. The crowd loved it. Everyone went absolutely nuts. Teachers were clapping, the football team was hyped, and the principal looked like he might cry from sheer joy. And then Gary lost his mind. Maybe it was the noise, maybe it was the flashing lights, or maybe Gary was just an agent of pure chaos. But the second he hit center court, he freaked out. He let out a deafening bleat, ripped the rope out of Josh's hands, and started sprinting around the gym like a tiny, furry missile. The crowd went insane. People were screaming, the cheerleaders scattered, and the band tried, and failed, to keep playing the fight song through their laughter. Gary, meanwhile, was wreaking havoc. He headbutted the mascot, knocked over a drum, and sent two cheerleaders diving for cover behind the bleachers. "Catch him!" the principal yelled, looking like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. We tried. We really did, but Gary was too fast. He galloped around the gym like he was born to destroy pep rallies, dodging every attempt to grab him. At one point, he climbed onto the announcer's table and stood there like a goat king surveying his chaotic kingdom. And then, in one final act of rebellion, Gary sprinted straight for the paper banner. He hit it head-on, ripped through it like tissue paper, and crashed into the football team, sending half of them sprawling across the floor. The crowd was absolutely losing it at this point. People were filming, kids were chanting, "Gary! Gary! Gary!" And even the teachers looked like they had given up on trying to restore order. That's when the fire alarm went off. I don't know if Gary hit the alarm by accident, or if the universe just decided we needed more chaos. But suddenly the whole school was being evacuated. The fire department showed up again, assuming it was another prank, and when they saw the goat, one firefighter just muttered, "Of course it's a goat." We finally managed to wrangle Gary outside, where he promptly sat down in the middle of the parking lot like his work was done. The principal was beside himself. "Whose idea was this?" he shouted, glaring at the crowd of laughing students. Josh, still catching his breath, grinned and gave a little bow. "You're welcome." Somehow, nobody got expelled. We had to apologize to the cheer team and write a letter to the fire department, but that was it. And Gary? He went back to his farm, presumably to tell the other goats about the time he ruled a high school pep rally. And every year, without fail, when homecoming rolls around, someone in the crowd always starts chanting, "Gary, Gary, Gary." And honestly, Gary earned it. It was supposed to be a quick favor. That's how it always starts, right? Something small, harmless. Something you think won't matter in the grand scheme of things. My friend Nate had gone out of town for a couple of weeks, and he asked me to check in on his mom, Andrea. "Just stop by, make sure everything's good," he'd said. She'll probably offer you dinner. Don't say no. She'll kill me if I let you turn her down. Andrea was always that mom. The one who loved feeding us, who remembered birthdays, and who could hold her own in a conversation better than most of our friends. She was gorgeous too, in a quiet, understated way. Long brown hair that always seemed perfectly messy, and these dark eyes that made you feel like she already knew what you were thinking before you said it. But I never let myself think about her like that. Not seriously. She was Nate's mom, and that made her off limits. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The first time I stopped by, it was no big deal. She thanked me, offered me coffee, and we talked at the kitchen table for a bit. It felt normal just catching up. She told me how weird it was having the house, so quiet without Nate around, how she missed having people to take care of. I listened, nodded, and told myself there was nothing unusual about any of it. But then I went back, and things started to change. The next time I stopped by, Andrea opened the door with a smile that felt different. It was warmer, closer, like we were already sharing a secret. She poured us wine instead of coffee this time, and we ended up sitting on the back patio, talking late into the night. Somewhere between the second and third glass, the conversation drifted into dangerous territory. We talked about life, about loneliness, and about how weird it felt when everyone you cared about seemed to be moving on without you. You ever feel like you're just stuck? She asked, her voice soft, almost vulnerable. Yeah, I admitted. All the time. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and for a moment, the world shrank down to just the two of us. You've grown up so much, she said, her eyes lingering on mine. I almost didn't recognize you. I should have laughed it off. Should have made some dumb joke to break the tension. But instead, I leaned in, and she didn't stop me. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant, like we were both testing the waters. But then something snapped, and we were pulling each other closer, lost in the heat of something neither of us could control. We stumbled inside, our hands everywhere, clothes tugged aside without a second thought. It was reckless, desperate, and over far too quickly. Afterward, we lay there on the couch, tangled in each other, the silence stretching between us like a loaded gun. This, she whispered, brushing her fingers through my hair. This was a mistake. I know, I muttered, though we both knew we didn't mean it. It didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, we found excuses to see each other. A quick visit to drop something off. A late-night text that turned into a secret meeting. Every time, we promised it would be the last. And every time we gave in, the guilt was unbearable every time Nate called to check in. Thanks for looking after my mom, he'd say, completely oblivious to what was really going on. Every time I heard his voice, it felt like someone twisting a knife in my chest. But I kept going back to Andrea. It was like playing with fire, knowing we were going to get burned but doing it anyway. And then it happened, exactly the way I knew it would. One night, Nate came home early. We thought we had more time, thought we were in the clear. But we weren't. He walked in and found us in the living room. Me and Andrea, sitting too close, her hand still resting on my thigh. The look on his face. God, I'll never forget it. You've got to be kidding me, Nate whispered, his voice low and shaking with disbelief. Nate, I started, but he cut me off. No, just no. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his whole body trembling with rage. How long? I didn't answer. What could I say? How long, man? He shouted, his voice cracking. Since a few weeks ago, I admitted my throat tight. The betrayal in his eyes was unbearable. You were supposed to be my best friend, he whispered, his voice full of hurt. How could you do this? With her? There were no words, nothing I could say to make it right. Get the fuck out of my house, Nate growled, his fists still clenched. Nate, please. Get out. I left without another word, the weight of what I'd done crushing me with every step I took. Andrea texted me later that night. Just a simple, "Are you okay?" But I didn't respond. It didn't matter anymore. Whatever we'd had was gone, buried under the wreckage we'd created. Nate blocked me on everything, phone, social media, all of it. I tried once to apologize, but it was pointless. I knew I'd destroyed everything that mattered. It's been years now, and I still think about that night. The moment I could have walked away, but didn't. The moment I let something that should have stayed off limits ruin the only real friendship I had. Some mistakes fade with time, but not this one. This one sticks with you. lodged deep in your chest like a scar you can never quite forget. And this one will haunt me for the rest of my life. It all started with a craving for something sweet. I was halfway through a lazy evening, scrolling through the same 3 apps over and over, when I thought, you know what would make this better? Cookies, not store-bought ones. I was in the mood for homemade, gooey, fresh out of the oven cookies. This was ambitious, considering I hadn't baked anything in 6 months. But how hard could it be? Cookies were just flour, sugar, and chocolate chips, right? I convinced myself it would be easy. Like those warm, cozy Instagram reels where everything comes together perfectly and the baker pulls a tray of golden cookies out of the oven to peaceful acoustic guitar music. I hauled myself off the couch, tied my hair up in a messy bun like a professional chef, and set out to bake the best cookies my neglected kitchen had ever seen. The first sign of trouble came when I realized I didn't have any butter. No butter. Not even a sad little half stick in the back of the fridge. Okay, no problem, I thought. Google will save me. I typed in butter substitute for cookies and discovered a whole world of weird solutions. Yogurt? Nope. Mashed bananas? I didn't have any. Vegetable oil? Sure, that sounded reasonable. Spoiler, it wasn't. But I didn't know that yet. I poured the oil into the bowl, pretending everything was under control. Next up, sugar. Easy. Except halfway through scooping, I realized I had just enough white sugar, but absolutely no brown sugar. This was when I should have stopped and admitted defeat. But no, I was committed. I asked Google what to do, and it told me to add a little extra white sugar and maybe a spoonful of honey. Good enough, I thought. It wasn't like anyone was grading me on these cookies. Then came the flour. I reached into the bag, only to find that it was, of course, almost empty. I scraped together what little flour I had left, praying it would be enough, and dumped it into the bowl. At this point, the batter looked weird, a little too shiny, a little too oily, but I figured once the chocolate chips went in, it would all balance out. Chocolate makes everything better, right? Except, surprise, I didn't have chocolate chips either. I found a lone chocolate bar in the pantry, one of those fancy dark chocolates with sea salt. Not exactly what the recipe called for, but desperate times, etc. I smashed the bar into chunks with the handle of a butter knife, scattering the pieces into the batter like I was totally in control. I stirred everything together. The dough was slippery, and somehow both too wet and too dry at the same time, which should have been impossible. But there it was. I had already come too far to turn back, so I scooped the lumpy dough onto a baking sheet and slid it into the oven, setting the timer for 12 minutes. That's when I noticed the eggs sitting on the counter. I forgot to add the eggs. I stared at the baking sheet through the oven door, feeling like I'd just committed a crime. What were eggs even for? Structure? Fluffiness? Did the cookies need eggs? Or was that just a suggestion? The dough was already halfway to becoming a disaster, so maybe it wouldn't even make a difference. I considered yanking the tray out of the oven, but that felt chaotic even for me. So I left them in, hoping for some kind of cookie miracle. Maybe they'd turn out fine. Maybe they'd even taste unique. 12 minutes passed. The timer beeped. I grabbed an oven mitt, opened the door, and oh no. The cookies had spread into one giant, flat, glistening blob. It looked less like a batch of cookies and more like a sad pancake that gave up halfway through life. The chocolate chunks were sunken in like little islands, and the edges were burnt to a crisp. The middle was still suspiciously gooey, almost like batter. I poked the giant cookie pancake with a spatula, hoping it would magically firm up if I gave it some time. It did not. It just wobbled sadly, as if it too knew I had failed. At this point, I knew I had 2 options. Admit the cookies were a disaster and toss them, or convince myself they were rustic. I went with option 2. I hacked at the cookie blob with a spatula, breaking it into vaguely cookie-shaped pieces, and piled them onto a plate. They were greasy and misshapen, but they were mine. I sat down at the table, picked up a piece, and took a bite. It was awful. Somehow both crunchy and oily, with an aftertaste that reminded me of regret. The dark chocolate was the only redeeming part, but even that couldn't save it. I chewed slowly, thinking this is what failure tastes like. The cat jumped onto the chair beside me, her nose twitching. She gave me a look that seemed to say, "You did this to yourself." I offered her a small piece of cookie out of curiosity, and she sniffed it, then flicked her tail in disgust before walking away. Fair. I stared at the pile of sad, oily cookie pieces, wondering where exactly things had gone wrong. Probably at the vegetable oil, or maybe the missing eggs, or, every other step. But then, as I sat there with my failure cookies, I started to laugh. Because really, what else could I do? It was just one of those nights where nothing goes according to plan, where every decision leads to disaster, and the only thing left to do is sit in the mess you made and eat cookies that taste like poor life choices. I grabbed another piece and took another bite, grimacing as I chewed. It was still bad, but somehow the whole thing felt kind of funny, like life had thrown me a curveball, and instead of ducking, I just let it hit me right in the face. Eventually, I gave up on the cookies and made some toast instead. Basic, reliable, no surprises. As I stood in the kitchen waiting for the toaster to pop, I thought about how life is just a series of weird little experiments. Sometimes things work out. Most times they don't. But you keep trying anyway because maybe the next attempt will turn out just right. The toast popped up, perfectly golden. I buttered it because of course now I remembered I had butter, and carried it back to the table where the sad cookie pancake still sat in all its greasy glory. The cat wandered back over, eyeing the toast like it might be more her speed. Don't even think about it, I told her, and she blinked slowly, already planning her next crime. I took a bite of toast. It was delicious, and in that moment, it didn't matter that the cookies were a disaster. I tried. I failed spectacularly. But hey, at least I had toast. It was almost 3 a.m. when the knock came at my door. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, the kind of sound that slips into your mind when you're caught between sleep and whatever strange thoughts haunt you in the middle of the night. But then it came again. 3 soft knocks, hesitant, like the person on the other side wasn't sure if they should be there at all. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my heart already racing. Nobody knocked on my door at this hour unless something was wrong. When I opened it, there she was, Margot, soaked from the rain, wearing a look on her face that stopped me cold. "Hey," she whispered, like she wasn't sure if I'd slam the door in her face or pull her inside. I stood there for a beat, stunned. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years. Not since that fight, the one that ended everything we were supposed to be. We didn't drift apart slowly, like some people do. No, we blew up, all at once, like a house of cards collapsing with a single gust of wind. And yet here she was, standing in front of me, rain dripping from her jacket, looking both lost and defiant, like she'd just run out of places to go. "Margot," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "What are you doing here?" She gave me a small, exhausted smile. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without a word, and she slipped past me, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the hardwood. She stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, like she didn't know where to put herself. "I know I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low. I didn't know where else to go." I closed the door quietly behind her, the sound of the rain muffled but steady outside. "Do you want to sit?" She nodded, and we both moved to the couch, the silence between us thick with all the things we weren't saying. "Sorry for just showing up like this," she murmured, running her fingers through her damp hair. "It's okay," I said, though I wasn't sure if it was. My brain hadn't caught up with what my heart was already doing, trying to make space for her again, whether I wanted to or not. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the version of Margot I used to know. The one who used to curl up next to me on the same couch, stealing my hoodies and my best jokes, her laugh bright enough to make me believe the world wasn't such a bad place. "I missed you," she whispered. The words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, me too." For a while, we just sat there, the rain tapping against the windows, the hum of old memories filling the space between us. It was strange being this close to her again after all the time and distance. Part of me wanted to reach out and touch her hand just to see if it still fit in mine the way it used to. But the other part, the cautious, scarred part, kept me still. "Why now?" I asked finally. She sighed, leaning back against the couch, her eyes tired. "I don't know. Tonight just felt like too much. And you were the only person I could think of." It wasn't exactly the answer I wanted, but it was honest, and that was more than I'd expected. I stood up and grabbed a couple of towels from the bathroom, tossing one to her. "You're soaked," I said, trying to fill the air with something practical. "Yeah," she muttered, rubbing her hair with the towel. "Forgot my umbrella. Some things never change, huh?" I smiled despite myself. "Some things no?" She caught my eye and held it, and for a second, it felt like the world tilted just slightly, bringing us back to a place we'd left behind. We sat there for a while longer, not saying much, just listening to the rain and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. It was a fragile kind of peace, the kind that feels like it could shatter if you breathe too hard. But it was something, and that was more than we'd had in a long time. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "about what would have happened if we hadn't, you know?" "All the time," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, like she'd been waiting to hear that. Me too. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say to her. Apologies that had gathered dust in the corners of my heart. Regrets I hadn't known how to carry until now. But none of them felt right. Not here, not now, with the rain wrapping around us like a blanket we didn't know we needed. So instead, I just said, "I'm glad you came." Margot smiled, a small, tired smile, but real. Me too. At some point, she kicked off her shoes and curled her legs beneath her, just like she used to. I grabbed a couple of pillows and tossed her one, and without thinking, we fell back into our old rhythm. Two people sharing the same quiet, trying to figure out what came next. She rested her head against the arm of the couch, her eyelids heavy with sleep. "Can I crash here?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yeah," I whispered. "Of course." I sat there, watching as she drifted off, her breath steady and calm. For the first time in a long while, the weight in my chest didn't feel quite so heavy. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if this was a second chance, or just a moment in the dark, a brief pause in the chaos of life. But for now, it didn't matter. For now, she was here, and that was enough. The rain outside slowed to a gentle patter, and as I lay back on the couch, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, I let my eyes close. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept. A few nights ago, something happened that I can't explain. I keep telling myself it was a dream, but it wasn't. I know it wasn't. It was around 2 a.m., and I was lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, trying to fall asleep. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the occasional groan of the old building settling. I was just about to call it a night when I noticed something strange. The bedroom door, normally shut tight, was cracked open. Just an inch. That might not sound like a big deal, but here's the thing. I always close it before bed. I have ever since I was a kid. I like knowing it's closed, knowing I can see the boundary between me and the rest of the apartment. I stared at the door for a second, trying to remember if I'd maybe forgotten to shut it. But I was sure, absolutely sure, that I had. My heart started to pound a little harder, but I told myself it was nothing. The door could have shifted from a draft, or maybe I hadn't pulled it all the way closed. It was stupid to freak out over something like this. So I got up, walked across the room, and shut the door. Hard, just to be sure it latched. I stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the fridge, distant and steady. I let out a breath, turned off the bedside lamp, and climbed back into bed. I told myself to stop being paranoid. That was when I saw it. The door was open again. Same position, just a crack, an inch wide, like someone had nudged it open from the other side. My stomach dropped. My mouth went dry. I knew I had closed it. I felt the latch click. I stared at the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe the latch was loose, or the frame was crooked. Something simple, something explainable. Then something moved, just behind the crack in the doorway, barely visible in the darkness. Something shifted. A shadow, slipping quietly along the floor, like a hand retreating back into the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't do anything but stare at that door. And then, it opened wider. Not fast, not all at once. Just a slow, deliberate inch, like someone was being careful, like they didn't want to be caught. The gap was now just wide enough for me to see into the hallway. And I swear, I saw something. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything I could recognize. Just a shape. crouched low to the ground, almost blending with the shadows. But the eyes, those I could see, two pale, gleaming eyes, staring at me from the darkness. And then it smiled. The corners of its mouth stretched up, too far, too wide, almost splitting its face in half. It was a grin that didn't belong on any human face. It looked hungry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the blanket over my head, to pretend this wasn't happening. But I couldn't move. I was frozen, pinned to the bed by that awful, smiling thing in the hallway. Then it spoke. In my voice. "Come closer," it whispered. The sound was wrong, like it was trying to copy me, but missing all the subtle inflections. A clumsy imitation. I shook my head, heart pounding in my chest. "No," I whispered, barely able to speak. The smile widened. Its head tilted, like it was amused by my fear. And then, slowly, deliberately, it pushed the door open another inch. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw myself out of bed, grabbed the door, and slammed it shut with all my strength. The latch clicked, and I pressed my back against the wood, my whole body trembling. For a long moment, I stood there in the dark, heart hammering, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then I heard it. Top, top, top. A knock. Not from the front door. Not from a wall. From inside the bedroom closet. I felt my blood turn to ice. I hadn't opened the closet all day. There was no reason, no way for anything to be in there. The knock came again, soft, polite. Top, top, top. I backed away slowly, shaking my head in disbelief. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself. "This isn't real." The door behind me rattled, as if something on the other side was trying the knob. I turned, gasping, just in time to see it move, twisting, testing, slowly turning in the dark. And then, the door creaked open. Just a crack, wide enough to see the smile. And the whisper came again, so soft I could barely hear it. "Let me in." I bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I ran to the front door of the apartment, heart racing, hands trembling as I unlocked it. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I just had to get out. As I fumbled with the lock, I heard the bedroom door open behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps padded across the floor. It was coming. I threw the door open and ran barefoot into the hall, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for breath under the flickering streetlights. The next morning, I went back with a friend to grab my things. I told them I was moving out, and I didn't care what it took to break the lease. When we got there, everything looked normal. No open doors. No extranjeros. Just my apartment, exactly as I'd left it. But on the bedroom door, right where I'd pressed my back against the wood, was a handprint. Not mine. And every night since, I hear it, just as I'm drifting off to sleep. Top, top, top. And a voice, soft and patient, whispering through the dark. "Let me in." The first time I tried flirting at a trivia bar, I accidentally answered every question wrong, with absolute confidence. I went from mysterious guy with a decent sense of humor to walking Wikipedia malfunction in under 10 minutes. It started because my friend Chris bailed on me last minute, which meant I was stuck flying solo. But the bar had two things working in my favor: trivia night and beer specials. I figured I'd grab a drink, answer a few questions, and maybe make it out with some dignity intact. That was the plan. Then I saw her. She was sitting at a high-top table with a couple of friends, scrolling through her phone between rounds. She had this relaxed, effortless vibe. Messy bun, oversized hoodie, and these round glasses that made her look like she was 2 seconds away from solving a murder mystery. Naturally, I knew I had to talk to her. Now, trivia bars are tricky when it comes to flirting. You can't just drop a pickup line in the middle of a heated debate over U.S. state capitals. So, instead of overthinking it, I walked over, gave her an easy grin, and said, "Mind if I join your team? I come with free beer knowledge and random facts." Her friend looked skeptical, but she smiled. "Do you actually know stuff?" she asked. "Or are you just here for the beer?" "Both," I said confidently. "I've got the brains and the beer." Her friend snorted. "All right, Einstein. You're in. But no pressure. We're already losing." I pulled up a chair, feeling good about my decision. This is going to be great. A couple of fun conversations, a chance to show off some trivia skills, and if the universe was kind, Maybe I'd get her number by the end of the night. What I didn't expect was how fast everything would go downhill. The trivia host leaned into the mic. All right, teams, next question. What year was the Declaration of Independence signed? Without thinking, I blurted, easy, 1775. The girl, her name was Emma, by the way, tilted her head. Isn't it 1776? I shook my head with absolute certainty. No, common mistake. It was actually signed the year before. Fun fact, her friend raised an eyebrow. That doesn't sound right. Oh, it's right, I said, already feeling a little too confident for someone making things up on the spot. Trust me. The trivia host read the answer a few seconds later. The correct answer is 1776. I blinked. Huh, weird. Emma laughed, clearly entertained. You were so sure. Yeah, well, I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. They probably edited the history books. Happens all the time. Her friend rolled his eyes, but Emma gave me a grin, like she wasn't ready to write me off just yet. All right, Jake, she teased. Let's see what else you've got. That's when the next question hit. What's the largest desert in the world? I sat up straight, eager to redeem myself. The Sahara, I declared, with all the confidence of a man who had clearly forgotten half of high school geography. Emma squinted at me. I think it's Antarctica. No way, I said, shaking my head. Antarctica's ice. The Sahara's sand. Easy. Her friend sighed. I'm going with Emma on this one. And wouldn't you know it, the host announced the answer. The largest desert in the world is Antarctica. Wait, what? I said, genuinely baffled. How is that even possible? Emma grinned, resting her chin on her hand. A desert doesn't need sand, just needs to be really dry. I stared at her in disbelief. This is deeply unfair. She laughed, a warm, bright laugh that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, my trivia train wreck wasn't a complete disaster. You're 2 for 2, she said. What else don't you know? Plenty, I admitted, grinning. But I say it all with confidence. The rest of the round went about the same. I missed a question about constellations. Guessed completely wrong on who invented the telephone. Edison was apparently not the answer. And at one point, I confidently told the group that dolphins were classified as fish. They are not. Emma, to my surprise, found the whole thing hilarious. Every time I got an answer wrong, she'd laugh, shake her head, and say, "You're really committed to being wrong." Huh. Hey, I said with a shrug. If you're going to be wrong, you might as well own it. By the time the final round rolled around, our team was firmly in last place, but somehow I didn't care. I was having too much fun watching Emma laugh at my ridiculous answers, and honestly, that felt like a win in itself. When the trivia host announced the winners, spoiler, it was not us. Emma turned to me with a grin. So, Jake, any other skills besides being consistently wrong? I gave her my best smile. I'm also great at ordering drinks. How do you feel about a victory beer? Her eyes sparkled. You mean a loser's beer? Same thing, I said, standing up. Come on, first round's on me. She didn't hesitate. You're on. As we made our way to the bar, her friend gave me a playful shove. You know you're like historically bad at trivia, right? Yeah, I said, laughing. But I'm pretty good at drinks. Emma grinned beside me, her laugh still ringing in my ears. And somehow, even with all the wrong answers and embarrassing moments, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd finally gotten something right. And honestly, that was the best prize I could have asked for. I wasn't supposed to be there. That's the thought that kept running through my head as I stood at the edge of the bar, swirling a whiskey I didn't even really want. It was one of those nights I'd promised myself I wouldn't have, the kind that starts with a quick drink and ends somewhere between bad decisions and tangled sheets. But the idea of staying home, alone with my thoughts, felt like too much. So, there I was. The bar was packed, the air thick with the scent of beer, perfume, and the kind of energy that makes you feel like anything could happen. People were pressed together, bodies swaying to the music, conversations buzzing just loud enough to drown out any regrets. And then there he was. He wasn't doing anything special, just sitting at the far end of the bar, elbows resting on the counter, nursing a drink like it wasn't his first. His jacket was slouched off one shoulder, and his hair looked like he'd run his hands through it too many times. There was something effortless about him, like he hadn't planned to be here either, But now that he was perfectly at ease with it. Our eyes met, and everything else in the room seemed to blur. He gave me a small, knowing grin, the kind that says, yeah, this is going to happen. I should have looked away. I should have smiled politely and turned back to my drink. But I didn't. I never do. Before I knew it, I was sliding onto the stool next to him, my glass clinking softly as I set it down. What are we drinking to? I asked, as if we were already halfway through a conversation we hadn't started yet. He tilted his head, considering me with a smirk. How about to bad ideas? I laughed, and it felt too easy, too comfortable, like I'd already let myself fall into whatever this night was becoming. The conversation started slow, like a warm-up lap before the real race begins. He asked me where I was from, what I did if I came here often. Simple questions, the kind you ask when you don't care about the answers but care about the person giving them. And I gave him the version of myself I always give on nights like this. The fun one, the easy one, the one who doesn't carry the weight of too many mornings after. We drank, we flirted, and the space between us kept getting smaller, like gravity was pulling us together. Every time his hand brushed against mine, it felt deliberate, like a slow burn that neither of us wanted to put out just yet. Want to get out of here? He asked eventually, his voice low, like the question was a secret meant only for me. There was no hesitation. Yeah, I whispered. Let's go. The walk to his place was fast, but it felt longer than it should have. Every step heavy with anticipation, every glance between us crackling with unspoken promises. By the time we made it through his front door, we were already tangled together, kissing hard, hands moving fast, the night unfolding exactly the way we both knew it would. His apartment was small, barely lived in. Just a bed, a couch, and a bookshelf filled with paperbacks that looked like they'd been read and forgotten. We didn't waste time. Clothes hit the floor, kisses grew frantic, and everything else disappeared into the kind of chaos that only two strangers can create together. The sex was good. Not perfect, not life-changing, but good enough to make me forget where I was for a while. We moved together like we were chasing something we couldn't quite name, laughing between kisses, gasping for breath like we were running out of time. And for a few hours, it felt like enough. But mornings always pull you back to reality. I woke up to sunlight cutting through the blinds, harsh and unforgiving. His bed was too warm, the sheets tangled around my legs like they were trying to keep me there. His arm rested lazily across my waist, and I could hear the soft rhythm of his breathing. For a moment, I stayed still, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, letting myself pretend that this could be something more than just a night. But it wasn't. It never is. I slid out from under his arm as carefully as I could, the cold air hitting my skin the second I left the warmth of the bed. My clothes were scattered across the floor, and gathering them felt like collecting the pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. There's always a strange kind of sadness to getting dressed in a stranger's apartment, like you're slipping back into a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit anymore. I was almost at the door when I heard him stir. Heading out, he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I turned, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Yeah, got stuff to do. He propped himself up on one elbow, giving me that same lazy grin from the night before. It was fun, though, he said softly, as if that made it better somehow. Yeah, I whispered. It was. And just like that, it was over. The walk to the curb felt longer than it should have, the morning air sharp against my skin, biting through my jacket like punishment. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, but it didn't help. The cold I felt wasn't just outside, it was inside, too, settling deep in my bones in that way it always does after nights like these. The Uber ride home was filled with silence, the driver tapping his fingers on the steering wheel to some song I didn't recognize. I stared out the window, watching the city blur by, and tried to convince myself that this was what I wanted. Just a night, no strings, no complications. But the truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. It wasn't about him. It never is. It was about me, about the way I keep chasing these fleeting moments, hoping they'll fill the spaces inside me that never seem to stay full. And the way they never do. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto my bed without even bothering to change. The ceiling stared back at me, blank and indifferent, offering no answers, no clarity, just the same silence I'd been trying to outrun all night. I wish I could say that this was the last time, that I finally figured out how to stop looking for connection in places where it doesn't exist. But the truth? I'll probably do it again, because as much as I hate the mornings after, I hate the silence even more. Maybe one day, I'll learn, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll keep going night after night, hoping that eventually one of these mornings will feel different. But until then, all I can do is keep moving forward. One kiss, one drink, one morning after the next. It was always her. I think I knew it from the start, though it took me years to admit it, even to myself. Sarah wasn't just my best friend. She was my safe place. The person I could call at 2 a.m. without apology. The one who knew my favorite songs before I even did. And the only person who saw every broken part of me and never flinched. We had rules, unspoken but solid. No drama, no weirdness, no crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. And for the longest time, those rules kept us safe. Until the night they didn't. It started with an ordinary Friday. We'd both had rough weeks. Her dealing with some work crisis, me trying to survive another breakup with someone who'd never really mattered. So she came over, like she always did, with a bottle of tequila and that crooked grin of hers that always made everything seem less awful. "You need a reset," she said, kicking off her shoes and throwing herself onto my couch. "Tequila therapy." I laughed. "That's the worst kind of therapy." She wiggled the bottle at me. "You say that every time." We spent the night the way we always did, talking about life, venting about people who didn't deserve us, and drinking just enough to forget why the world felt so heavy. Somewhere between the second shot and the third story, she leaned her head on my shoulder, sighing in that familiar way she did when life wore her down. "You know," she murmured, her voice soft, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I knew she meant it in the way friends mean things, platonically, without complication. But it hit me harder than it should have. I felt her warmth seep into me, the weight of her against my side, and suddenly, the space between us felt too small. Or maybe just too big. "Same," I whispered, my throat tight. I thought that would be the end of it. Just another quiet moment we'd let pass. One of 1,000 we'd tucked away over the years. But then she looked up at me, her gaze lingering longer than it should have, and everything between us shifted. "What are we doing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. And just like that, we were standing at the edge of a cliff I'd spent years pretending didn't exist. I could have made a joke, pulled us back to safer ground. But instead, I reached for her, and before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't slow or careful. It was messy and desperate, like we'd been waiting for this moment longer than we'd ever admit. And once we started, there was no stopping. We stumbled into my bedroom, tearing down the walls we'd spent years building between us. And for the first time in forever, everything felt right. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the dark, her breath warm against my neck, and I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was how it was always supposed to be. "This doesn't change anything, right?" she whispered, her fingers tracing circles on my chest. I knew what she was really asking. She was asking if we could still be us. If we could pretend this was just a moment, a small detour in a friendship that would stay intact. I should have told her the truth, that it had already changed everything, that I didn't know how to be her friend without wanting more. But instead, I kissed her hair and whispered, "Right. Nothing has to change." And just like that, I let her slip through my fingers. For a while it worked. We still hung out, still laughed, still spent nights tangled up in each other's beds, pretending we weren't crossing a line we couldn't come back from. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became for me to ignore the truth. I didn't just want her at night. I wanted all of her. But Sarah? Sarah wasn't looking for more. She was the kind of person who kept her heart in pieces, handing them out carefully, never giving anyone the whole thing. And me? I wanted the whole thing. It all came crashing down one night, the way these things always do. We were lying in bed, the glow of the streetlights casting soft shadows on the ceiling. And before I could stop myself, the words slipped out. "I love you." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel her body tense beside me, her breath hitch in her throat. And in that moment, I knew I'd just destroyed everything. Say something, I whispered, my heart pounding. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her like it could shield her from what I'd just said. I didn't want this to get complicated, she murmured, more to herself than to me. It's not complicated, I said, even though we both knew it was a lie. It's just the truth. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret, maybe, or sadness, or something in between. I can't give you what you want, she whispered. You know that. And just like that, the ground beneath us gave way. She stayed the night, but it felt different, like we were already saying goodbye, even if neither of us wanted to admit it. In the morning, she kissed me softly, almost apologetically, and whispered, I'll see you soon. But we both knew that wasn't true. We tried to keep things normal after that, but the cracks were too deep. Every conversation felt strained, every laugh forced, every touch like a reminder of what we weren't. And slowly, painfully, we drifted apart, not with a fight, but with silence. The kind of silence that fills the spaces where something beautiful used to be. It's been months now, and I still think about her. Every time I hear her favorite song, every time I pass the bar where we used to meet, every time the night feels a little too quiet. I wonder if she ever thinks about me, if she regrets what happened, or if she's happier now without me in her life. People say that sleeping with your best friend is either the best thing you'll ever do or the worst mistake you'll ever make. For me, it was both. For a little while, I had her, all of her, and even though it ended, even though it left me shattered in ways I wasn't prepared for, I wouldn't take it back. Because some people come into your life not to stay, but to show you what love can feel like, how it can break you open and leave you better, even if it also leaves you broken. And even though it hurts, God, does it hurt, I'm still grateful. Because for a little while, she was mine. And even if I never have that again, at least I know what it feels like to love someone with everything I have. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. But either way, it's all I have. We met at a mutual friend's rooftop party. It was one of those warm summer nights where everything feels a little softer, a little more possible. I wasn't even planning to stay long. Just long enough to say hi, have a drink, and slip away unnoticed. But then he walked up to me, smiled like we already knew each other, and said, "You look like you're ready to leave." I laughed. What gave me away? The shoes, he said, glancing down. No one wears real shoes to a rooftop party unless they're planning an escape. He was right. And just like that, we started talking. It wasn't forced or awkward. It was one of those rare conversations that feels like a deep breath after being underwater too long. He was funny, but not in a showy way, and he made me feel like I didn't have to try so hard. I liked that. I liked him. We ended up sitting on the edge of the roof for hours, legs dangling over the side, talking about everything from our worst first dates to the best places to get breakfast at 3 a.m. Before I left, he asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. I hesitated for a second, just long enough for my brain to remind me how these things usually end, but then I smiled and said, sure. And for a while, it felt like I made the right choice. Our first few dates were easy. No grand gestures, no games. Just two people figuring each other out, sharing meals and stories, laughing at dumb things that didn't matter but somehow felt important. He had this way of making me feel like the world wasn't so heavy, like things didn't have to be complicated to be good. I let my guard down slowly, piece by piece, and every time I did, he stayed. He showed up every time, and that made me believe maybe this time would be different. Until one day, he didn't. It started small. The text that used to come every morning now arrived in the afternoon. Plans that had been so easy before started coming with disclaimers. Work's crazy. I've been really tired. I told myself not to overthink it. People get busy, right? Relationships settle into rhythms. But the rhythm was off, and I could feel it. Every time he canceled, every time he pulled back just a little further, that old fear crept in. The fear that I was once again holding on to something that was slipping away. I told myself to be patient. If I gave him space, maybe things would go back to how they were in the beginning. But the thing about space is that it's hard to know when you're giving it or just getting left behind. The night it all fell apart. We had plans to meet for dinner. Something casual, nothing special. I spent the whole day looking forward to it, excited to see him, hoping that maybe tonight would feel like the beginning again. But an hour before we were supposed to meet, he texted, "I don't think I can make it." Rain check. That word, rain check, sat heavy in my chest like a weight pressing down on everything I'd been holding up. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar ache settle in. The one that tells you you're losing someone but can't do a damn thing to stop it. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it, waiting for the knot in my throat to loosen, hoping it would. But it didn't. So I called him. He answered after a few rings, his voice warm but distant, like he already knew what was coming. "Hey," he said, as if everything was fine. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Are we okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I wanted it to be. There was a pause, long enough for me to know the answer before he even said it. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought I was ready for this, but maybe I'm not." And just like that, everything shattered. I wanted to ask him why. Why he made me believe he wanted this if he didn't. Why he pulled me in only to let go. But I knew there was no point. People leave for all kinds of reasons, most of which have nothing to do with you. "Okay," I whispered. It was all I could manage. We said our goodbyes quietly, politely, like two people ending a conversation instead of a connection. When I hung up, I sat on the floor of my apartment for a long time, feeling the weight of it all sink in. It wasn't just him I was losing. It was the hope I'd let myself feel, the possibility of something real. And that, somehow, hurt more than losing him ever could. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions, work, errands, texts from friends. But everything felt muted, like the world had dimmed a little. I deleted his number, muted him on social media, and told myself I was fine. But grief doesn't follow rules, and healing doesn't happen just because you want it to. Some nights, I found myself scrolling through old messages, trying to pinpoint the moment it all started to slip away. I wanted to understand how we'd gone from something that felt so easy to something that fell apart without warning. But there was no single moment, just a slow unraveling, thread by thread, until there was nothing left. It's strange how loss lingers in the quiet moments, in the songs that remind you of someone, in the empty space where their text used to be. I wanted to stop missing him, to stop wondering if he missed me too. But some nights, the missing still sneaks in, soft and sharp, like a splinter you forgot was there until you brush against it. But slowly, painfully slowly, I'm learning to live with the absence he left behind. I'm learning that not every connection is meant to last, and not every story gets a happy ending. And that's okay. Some people come into your life just to teach you how to let go. These days, I'm focusing on myself, on building a life that feels good, not because I'm waiting for someone to share it with, but because I deserve that kind of happiness. I still believe in love, not the perfect cinematic kind, but the real, messy, complicated kind. The kind that stays even when things get hard. And if love finds me again, I'll be ready. But this time, I won't shrink myself to fit into someone else's world. I'll stand exactly as I am, whole, messy, and enough. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. I am enough. With or without someone else, I am enough. And that's a kind of peace no one can take from me. So I'll keep going one breath at a time, one step at a time. And if someone shows up who's willing to walk beside me, that'll be a gift. But if not, I'll still be here, standing tall, knowing that I am complete all on my own. Because at the end of the day, I've got me. And for now, that's more than enough. This happened just 3 nights ago, and I still feel like I haven't fully come back from it. I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment downtown, nothing fancy. It's quiet enough most nights, the kind of place where the neighbors keep to themselves. I usually like that, no noise, no drama. But now I wish anyone had been awake that night. It started around 2 a.m. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard the doorknob to my front door jiggle. At first I thought maybe it was my imagination. I live on the 4th floor, and no one ever comes up here by accident. But then I heard it again, a slow, deliberate click-click of the knob turning like someone trying to open the door. I sat up, my heart thudding in my chest. My first thought was that it might be someone drunk, trying the wrong apartment. It's happened before in this building. I grabbed my phone and listened, waiting to hear them walk away. But they didn't. Instead, the knob twisted harder, rattling against the lock. I climbed out of bed, my pulse hammering in my ears. I crept toward the door, trying not to make a sound. The jiggling stopped for a second, and I took the chance to peek through the peephole. That's when I saw it. Someone was standing there, just inches from the door, their face tilted toward the peephole. I only caught a glimpse, but it was enough to know something was very, very wrong. The person's face, it was familiar. It was me. I stumbled back from the door, heart slamming in my chest, nearly dropping my phone. I blinked, hoping, praying that I had imagined it. But when I looked through the peephole again, the figure was still there. It was me. Same face, same hair, same clothes I had worn to bed. But the expression on its face, that wasn't mine. It was smiling. Not a normal smile. Something about it was too wide, too forced, as if the muscles in my own face had been stretched and twisted into a grotesque imitation of joy. Then it knocked. Just once. Tall. The sound was so soft it felt almost polite. "Let me in," it whispered. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming to stay silent. But somehow, it knew I was standing just on the other side of the door. It pressed its hand against the wood, and I could hear the faint scrape of nails dragging down the surface, slow and deliberate. "Come on," it whispered, still using my voice. "It's cold out here." I backed away, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed the lock and twisted it as hard as I could, just to make sure it was secure. My fingers were slick with sweat, and I had to bite back the urge to scream. "Let me in," it whispered again, the words dripping with something wrong. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there frozen as the thing on the other side of the door knocked once more. Tap. Then again. Talk. And then, from the other side of the door, it said, "If you're in there, then who am I?" I felt my legs buckle under me. My skin crawled, like something vile was creeping under the surface, too close to shake off. The doorknob jiggled again, harder this time, and the thing outside let out a low, delighted hum, like it was enjoying my fear. "Let me in," it whispered. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard another sound, a faint knock. This time, it wasn't from the front door. It came from inside the apartment. I spun around, clutching my phone like a weapon, my breath caught in my throat. The sound came again, tap, tap, tap. This time from the closet in my bedroom. Something inside me snapped. I bolted for the front door, twisting the lock and yanking it open without thinking. The hallway outside was empty. I ran barefoot down the corridor, slamming the stairwell door behind me. I didn't stop until I was out of the building, standing under the streetlights, gasping for breath in the cold night air. When I finally looked back at the building, I saw it. There, in the window of my apartment, was a shadow. It looked just like me, and it was waving. I stayed at a friend's place that night, too scared to go back. The next day, I returned to the apartment to grab my things. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. On the inside of my front door, there was a handprint, not mine. And ever since that night, I've been getting these texts from my own number. They just say the same thing, over and over. "Let me in." I blocked the number. I changed my phone. It doesn't matter. Every night, without fail, the messages keep coming. And I know, sooner or later, I'll slip. One night, I'll open the door. And when I do, it'll finally be inside. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a quiet night. I swung by Caleb's house to grab my jacket, which I'd left there the night before. We'd had a few beers, played some pool in his basement, and I didn't think twice about stopping by when I realized I forgot it. Caleb wasn't home. He'd gone out with his girlfriend for the night, but his mom, Tessa, was there. She opened the door with that warm smile she always wore, barefoot, holding a half-full glass of wine. "Come on in," she said, motioning me inside without hesitation. Tessa had always been cool with us hanging around. She treated Caleb's friends like family, always offering food or drinks, cracking jokes, and teasing us just enough to make us laugh, but not enough to embarrass us. I'd never thought of her as anything more than Caleb's mom. She was gorgeous, sure. Wavy auburn hair, bright hazel eyes, and a laugh that could disarm you in a heartbeat. But she was off limits. Absolutely off limits. Until she wasn't. "You want a glass?" she asked, lifting her wine. I almost said no. Almost. But something in the way she smiled made me stay. "Yeah, sure," I said, shrugging like it didn't matter. We sat at the kitchen counter, sipping wine and chatting. It felt easy, like talking to a friend. We joked about Caleb's terrible taste in music and the ridiculous things he used to get up to when we were kids. The conversation was light, effortless, but there was something else simmering beneath the surface. "You've grown up so much," she said after a while, swirling her wine. "It's strange, isn't it? One day your kid's running around this house, and now look at you." Her words lingered in the air, heavier than they should have been. "Yeah," I said awkwardly, trying to laugh it off. "Time flies, I guess." She gave me that knowing smile, the kind that made my heart beat just a little too fast. "You've turned out well, though," she said softly. "Better than most." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled, hoping the wine would calm whatever was happening between us. But it didn't. Then, she touched my hand. It was subtle, almost nothing, but it lingered. Her fingers lightly brushed mine, and that tiny gesture sent my brain into overdrive. I told myself to let it go, to stand up, thank her for the wine, and leave. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned in, and before I knew what I was doing, we kissed. It started soft, hesitant, like neither of us could believe it was happening. But when she didn't pull away, something snapped inside me. Her hand slid behind my neck, pulling me closer, and suddenly the world narrowed to just us. We stumbled into the living room, her laugh soft and breathless in my ear. I knew, even as it was happening, that this was a mistake I'd never be able to take back. But in that moment, it didn't matter. We ended up on the couch, tangled in each other, the weight of what we were doing completely erased by the heat between us. It was reckless and selfish, but it felt inevitable, like it was always going to happen, no matter how much we tried to pretend otherwise. When it was over, the silence hit like a freight train. "This can't happen again," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I know," I muttered, though I knew I didn't mean it. And it didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, we found ways to see each other. It became an addiction, something we couldn't resist, no matter how much we tried. Quick visits when Caleb wasn't around, late-night texts that turned into stolen moments in her living room. Every time, we swore it would be the last. Every time, we failed. The guilt was unbearable. Every time Caleb texted me, "Thanks for helping my mom out, man, I really appreciate it," it felt like someone was squeezing the air out of my lungs. But I kept going back, and then everything blew up. It happened one night when Caleb came home early. I was still there, sitting too close to Tessa on the couch, my hand resting lightly on her thigh. We thought we had more time. We were wrong. The door swung open, and there he was standing in the doorway, frozen in disbelief. "What the fuck?" Caleb whispered, his voice low and dangerous. I jumped up, my heart pounding. "Caleb, Don't," he snapped, his fist clenching. "Don't say a fucking word." The look in his eyes was a mix of rage and betrayal. "How long?" he demanded, stepping closer. "How long have you been doing this behind my back?" There was no way to lie, no excuse that would make any of it okay. "A few weeks," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Caleb's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might hit me. But the look of pure hurt on his face was worse than any punch could have been. "You were supposed to be my best friend," he whispered, his voice cracking. "How could you do this? With her? I had nothing. No words. No apology that would undo what I'd done. Get the hell out of my house," he growled, his voice low and shaking. "Caleb, please. Get the fuck out." I left without another word, the sound of the door slamming behind me ringing in my ears like a death sentence. Tessa tried to reach out afterward, texts, calls, but I ignored them. Whatever we'd had was over, ruined by the fallout I'd known was coming all along. Caleb blocked me on everything. My number, social media, everything. I tried once to apologize, but he never responded. And honestly, I don't blame him. It's been a couple of years now, and the weight of that night still sits heavy on my chest. I see Caleb's name pop up in mutual friends' posts sometimes, and every time it's like a punch to the gut, a reminder of what I lost. Some mistakes fade with time, others stay with you, burned into your memory like scars that never fully heal. And this one will haunt me forever. We call it the DIY flamethrower incident. And yes, it's as stupid as it sounds. It all started in chemistry class. Now let me make one thing clear. Our chemistry teacher, Mr. Franklin, was way too trusting. He was one of those teachers who believed in hands-on learning and assumed that giving teenagers access to dangerous chemicals was a good idea. He thought it would make us curious about science. What it actually did was give us the tools to create chaos. The whole thing began with Andy. Andy was, without a doubt, the kind of kid who would burn his own house down just to see if he could build another one. If someone said, "That's impossible," Andy would immediately try to prove them wrong, even if it meant risking life and limb. So when Mr. Franklin showed us how to make a Bunsen burner flare a little higher by adjusting the gas valve, Andy leaned over to me and said, "I bet I could build a flamethrower." "You are not building a flamethrower," I said, already regretting being in his general vicinity. Andy grinned. "It's not that hard." That was all it took. Andy spent the rest of the day scribbling plans in his notebook, which were really just doodles of stick figures with fire shooting out of their hands. By lunch, he had recruited me, Nate, and Emily into his dumb scheme. "Think about it," he said, waving his notebook like it was the blueprints to the Apollo mission. "A flamethrower. For science." "Dude," Nate said, "we are not doing this." "We totally are," Andy replied. The plan was to build the flamethrower using completely normal materials that wouldn't raise any red flags. We figured if we used a water gun, a can of hairspray, and some tubing we found in the lab supply closet, we could create a DIY monstrosity that would shoot flames. It was a terrible idea, so naturally we decided to do it in the middle of the school day. Our first challenge was sneaking the supplies out of the chem lab. Mr. Franklin had gone to refill his coffee, leaving us unsupervised, which, looking back, was mistake number one. Andy grabbed the tubing, Nate found the hairspray, and Emily stole a lab coat to make it look professional. Meanwhile, I stood guard at the door, desperately trying to convince myself this wasn't going to end in a felony. By some miracle, we made it to the abandoned utility room behind the gym without getting caught. That's where Andy assembled the flamethrower. And by assembled, I mean he duct-taped the tubing to the water gun, filled the gun with rubbing alcohol, and attached the can of hairspray like it was some kind of janky fuel tank. "This is either going to be the coolest thing we've ever done," Andy whispered, "or we're going to die." We should have stopped right there. We really should have. Instead, Andy aimed the water gun at a pile of old cardboard boxes, took a deep breath, and pulled the trigger. Whoosh! A massive plume of fire shot out of the end of the gun, lighting the cardboard boxes on fire instantly. It was like the 4th of July, if the fireworks were made by idiots with a death wish. For about 5 glorious seconds, we just stood there, stunned, watching the flames dance in front of us. And then it hit us. We had no idea how to put it out. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. "We're going to burn down the school." "IT worked," Andy shouted, delighted, as if that was the biggest takeaway here. "Dude, put it out," I screamed, panic finally setting in. We frantically looked around for something, anything to stop the fire. Nate grabbed a mop and started smacking the flaming boxes with it, which only made things worse because now the mop was on fire. Emily screamed, grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, and tried to spray the flames, but she missed completely and sprayed Nate in the face instead. "Ah, my eyes!" Nate yelled, staggering around blindly, like a cartoon character. Meanwhile, Andy was still holding the flamethrower, grinning like an idiot. "This is so awesome," he whispered, clearly unbothered by the fact that we were moments away from an arson charge. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, the door burst open, and there stood Coach Harris, the most terrifying teacher in the school. Coach Harris was a mountain of a man, built like a professional wrestler, and with a permanent scowl that made it seem like he hated joy itself. He took one look at the scene, the flaming boxes, the smoking mop, Nate screaming, and Andy holding a makeshift flamethrower, and just froze. For one glorious moment, we all stared at each other in stunned silence. Then Coach Harris slowly took off his whistle, pointed at the fire, and said, "What in the holy hell is this?" Before any of us could answer, the fire alarm went off. Water started raining down from the sprinkler system, soaking everything, including us. The fire hissed out instantly, leaving behind a soggy mess of blackened cardboard and burning shame. Coach Harris just stood there, dripping wet, his scowl deepening by the second. "I don't even want to know," he muttered, shaking his head. You idiots better hope the principal doesn't find out about this. That's when we heard the sirens. 2 fire trucks, 3 cop cars, and an ambulance pulled up outside the gym. Apparently, someone had seen the smoke coming out of the utility room window and called 911. The fire chief stormed in, looking around like he was expecting to find the building in ruins. Instead, he found 4 soaked teenagers standing in a puddle of ashes and regret, one of whom was still holding a water gun flamethrower. The chief just stared at us for a moment, shook his head, and said, "This better not be a prank. It's an experiment?" Andy offered weakly. The fire chief let out the longest, most exhausted sigh I've ever heard in my life. "I'm too old for this crap," he muttered, and turned around to leave. Amazingly, none of us got arrested. Coach Harris vouched for us, saying it was just kids being stupid, which was the understatement of the century. We got detention for a month and had to write apology letters to the janitorial staff for the mess. Mr. Franklin, for some reason, still let us come to chemistry class, though he did confiscate every Bunsen burner from the room just in case. And the best part? The water gun flamethrower became legend. Kids told the story for years, each version wilder than the last. Some said we burned down half the school. Others claimed we got hired by the fire department to teach fire safety, which was objectively false. And Andy? Andy still carries around a tiny plastic lighter, just in case anyone doubts him. "Flamethrower?" he'll say, flicking the lighter with a grin. "Yeah, I built one once." And honestly, I don't even know if he's bragging or apologizing.